Lightbringer, channel of mythical astronomy. Learn the secrets of the stars, the sun, the planets, and the moon. That's right. We're here to talk about the moon. I'm joined by a very special guest, full of moony ideas. And we will be delighting you and regaling you with moon mythology and moon theories, moon sigils, houses of moon worship. It's time to talk about the moon. Oh, yes. And joining me to talk about the moon is Michael Talks About Stuff. Hello, Michael, and thank you.
Hey, David. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I'm sorry, just checking my audio here. I've had, don't know if you've heard, I've had some audio issues lately here on the live streams, but I think I have solved the problems. And chat, let me know how we both are sounding. If there's any.
Yeah, I'll talk a little too so they can hear me. I'm familiar with that. My backyard baseball streams were plagued with audio issues, so I get you.
Well, the first thing I want to tell you guys, everything sounds a little low. Sounds fine. Yeah, I could probably turn mine up because there we go. And then let me know. Okay, so folks, Michael, first of all, Michael Talks About Stuff. Incredible YouTube channel. I could go off for 10 minutes about how we see the story in similar ways and how much I enjoy hearing somebody else approach the story with a similar general framework, but blah, blah, blah. I think that will be boring and self-aggrandizing, but I really do appreciate you coming on the channel. It is always a delight to mix it up with you. And basically, I'm a coward. This is the genesis of this stream, folks. I'm a coward, and Michael is here to put some backbone into me. You see, I used to talk about the moons and the stars in a little more literal way. I have slid towards trying to be presentable, and speaking of, got my Santa, smoking Santa Christmas shirt. Michael coming through with a nice peach polo.
Yep.
You're everyone's peach. Benjamin Stark and Renly's peach, all wrapped in one. And so basically, yes, I'm a coward. I've wandered away from trying to talk about specific ideas about the comets and the moons and all that. And I have gone more towards talking about symbolism and mythical archetypes and stuff that sounds more academic in my never-ending desire for acceptance. I am ashamed. And watching some of your videos, I feel like I've got the courage back. And we're here to talk about if the moons are magic. That's what we're here to talk about. Not just like, ooh, the moon symbol. We're here to literally talk about if the moons are sources of magic, if there are spirits or souls or alien entities that are using them or living there or coming back and forth from the planet. What's up with the two moons? What happened to the other one? Is it around somewhere? Are people using moon stuff for magic? If there are pieces of moon laying around, where are they and what are they? So we're going to come at this from a bunch of different angles. Basically, the two of us have a collection of like scenes and concepts and things that we are going to just sort of toss back and forth. It's the whole idea with the Lore Summit is a mix it up kind of thing, where I invite someone else on with strong ideas and we sort of toss them back. We're going to workshop. What we did, actually, the exciting and dangerous part of this, Michael, is that we didn't pull a ton of quotes to begin with. What we did actually was we have an outline of concepts, and then I am going to rapid fire be pulling these quotes, because the truth is they're all in here. Like you can't make as many YouTube videos as we have torturing the text as we do without getting this stuff basically jammed into your noggin. So it's going to be an old-fashioned new-fashioned, actually. These are new, these Lore Summits. But first of all, yes, Michael, you put out your longest video ever today. And so everyone's got homework. As soon as the stream is over, you've got like a almost 2-hour produced Michael Talks About Stuff theory about the others. I'm going to ruin David Lightbringer's video for next week and let it all out of the bag. No, it was terrific. I watched the whole thing this morning. So thanks for coming on. Give everyone an idea of what they can find on your channel and what you're talking about in your new video.
Yeah, okay. So, part of the reason we're doing this Moon Lore Summit is because I've been kind of also like reading into the text, and like as I've been trying to piece together my theories over the last couple of years, I've noticed there's something up with the moon, but I've never been quite able to get to the bottom of it. And I was feeling like I was getting more to the bottom of it. And I know David's talked a ton about the moon, so I'm like, well, who better to talk to about the moon if I think I have an idea than David? So then I was racing to get the video actually out the before this stream, so that we could talk about it in full. And the problem was, in order to explain what I think is going on with the moon, I had to explain what the others are, which is like one of the central mysteries of the books. So I had to do that first, and then we talk about the moon. So that's what my video today is I try to actually explain what I think the others are and go through all the times you see them in the text, and we'll get into all of that, I'm sure, throughout the stream. But yeah. So the moons. What was the original question, I guess?
No, I was just wanting you to mention your video. I am working on right now a video about the others. I've come at this thing several times, ice spiders, green men. And basically I was inspired by seeing the Fawn Friend on House of the Dragon. And so I've got some new commissioned artwork of green men and others kind of looking like each other on either side of the weirwood tree and stuff like that. I've mostly talked about the others as being connected to the weirwoods and created by the children, which is a lot of what you're talking about. I'm especially jealous of your phrasing that they are weirwood shadow babies, because that is...
Yeah.
We're saying the same thing with different words. We're just using George's words. That is exactly what they are. But of course, it's like, well, what's Shadows of the Weirwoods? What's in the Weirwoods? Well, green seer spirits, essentially. So my video is getting more at like what was in the tree that they were pulled from, kind of a thing. So we'll have to chop it up about that once my video's out, because I had definitely like 5 or 6 bullet points listening to your video today to respond to.
That would be good, because one of the follow-up videos that I want to do is try to figure out which green seers I think have cast others in the past. And like, a big part of that whole entire conversation of not only that, but who is in control of these? Is it the woman casting them? Is it the man casting them? Is it the tree? Is it something else? And getting to the bottom of what exactly is going on within the trees when they're cast is something that would, enlighten us all as to who may actually be in control of these shadows. So that'd be really interesting to talk about that at some point.
Well, it'd be cool to maybe do it on your channel.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
So it's like I'm always having you on my channel. You're boosting my ratings and stuff. I'd be happy to come on and return the favor. But
we can
guys,
do something like that.
I want to definitely encourage you to watch Michael's video. He's got some really cool speculation about Night's Queen and about John, if Night's Queen is still around, and like maybe Craster has seen her. There's some cool stuff in there. As always, Michael has got some, like I said, we see it similarly, but there's so much to notice, so it's always interesting to compare notes and see what you've caught. I really liked your Moonsinger angle on Daenerys' Waking of the Dragons. I'd not thought about that, the Moonsinger connection. That's cool. So
it's just George. That's how George loves to do his little clues too. It's like Miri drops one little throwaway line about Moonsinger birthing songs in Ashai, and then you get distracted by her talking about Maester Marwyn, and then she's singing as the dragons are born, and then the dragons come from the moon. It's just like, you got to put them all together, but all of a sudden you sound a little crazy, but you're onto something.
Well, this is why I've stopped talking about, the rocks up in the sky being magic. Because George, and this is the thing that I will say that's like the meta commentary, George is a great writer. He does love fantasy world building, Elio, but he keeps it in the background because the story is important. And that's why you could almost come to the opinion of someone like Elio, who's basically saying the story is the thing. It's a limited story. It's about the characters who are alive right now, and all the other stuff is just like, in a sense, he's right. It is just color. Like the main story is definitely the thing. And the thing about George is that even though he's a Dungeons and Dragons nerd and a world building nerd, he knows better than to let it interfere with the story. And that's why I've increasingly come to highlight the ways in which the themes of the magical world building complement and echo the conflicts of the heart of the characters. And in that way, it's always harmonious, and the character struggles are always in the foreground. And if you never even get into any of this, where do the others come from, and how are they being shadow cast out of the trees? You still love the story and understand the story and enjoy the story. But with 13 years to spend hacking this apart, me and Michael are here to talk about stuff, and we're going to talk about the moon. So, like we said, we're going to get into hardcore questions about the moon. But in order to learn about the moon, we must approach it through symbolism and some of these scenes, like the one at the night fort, which we will get into real quick here. But some quick moon facts: 30-day lunar cycles in Ice and Fire, and they refer to the black of the moon not just as the new moon when the moon is not there in the sky, but actually flaying the text. Yes, that's right. Strap that book on the cross, and let's get our flaying knives. No, the black of the moon, Arya talks about it. She goes and serves at the House of Black and White during the black of the moon, which is a 3-day period. So they're counting the new moon and the very slim crescent on either side of that, essentially, as a 3-day moon black period. Now, interestingly, Michael, Martin does a funny thing when he calls the moon a black hole in the sky once, which is not technically possible. So can you explain that for our audience?
Yeah, so there's Bran 3, A Dance with Dragons. He is doing like what I call an 80s training montage for Bran, where it's like short, quick paragraphs that are all really punchy and crazy things that Bran is doing or seeing, and every one of them begins with the phase of the moon. And so it's just tracking the moon cycle. And a few of the times he describes the moon as a black hole in the sky, which is like in between the times where it's a crescent, it's a black hole. And as David pointed out, apparently you just don't see the moon as a black hole in the sky. That just doesn't work. So this is something I've heard David bring up many times. And then when I looked into Elden Ring, there is actually 2 moons in the sky, and one of them is just straight black, darkened by dark magic. And in A Song of Ice and Fire, that really sounds like it might just be the black hole you're seeing in the sky is only visible because the other moon isn't there at the time. And it's light, like when the light of any moon, like even if it's just a little crescent, right? Maybe it makes it too bright in the night sky to see that other moon. But when when the moon is actually just not there, you can see the black hole. So maybe that's what's going on. That's the dark moon, and that would explain why there's the mystery of what he means by the black hole in the sky.
So, and the lyrics to that are "Black hole moon, won't you swoon?" Chat, if you're working on that, you have to go from there. Basically, we all swoon for Chris Cornell. So the point of this is we're talking about a new moon, and a new moon. When you see a crescent moon, that means the moon is close to the sun, respective of your position from Earth. Right. So it's just to the left or the right of the sun, and the sun is just glinting off the edge of the moon to give us that crescent. So the new moon, when it's entirely black, is when it's in the same position as the sun. And you can't see it because it's up during the day, like right below the sun. But you won't see it because it's during the day. During the new moon is the only time when you can have a solar eclipse. Because if it's instead of passing below the sun, if it happens to be right in front of it, that's when you get the partial or solar eclipse. So when Martin describes the moon as a black hole in the sky, it is mysterious. The first thing is that I think he's talking about the concept of a black hole as drinking the light. Because we've got all this dark stone drinking the light. Both of us tie this back to the disaster of the second moon. Because in case you didn't know, there used to be 2 moons in this universe, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat, drank the fire of the sun, gave birth to the dragons, and that's where dragons come from, and that's why they breathe fire. That's a description of some sort of meteor apocalypse, and that was essentially my first theory. So there is this thing where going to be a lot of reeling it in today. Basically, one of the questions we're going to attack is what happened to this second moon. It definitely got messed up, but it's always been an open question to me of whether it is actually gone or if there's a remnant of it up there in the sky. We definitely agree that there are pieces of it on the planet, and that's essentially the oily black stone.
I'm firmly coming around to the idea that there is a large remnant of it in the sky, like probably most of it. Like I think a big chunk may have been blasted off to create the red comet and the oily black stone that fell to Earth. But the black hole in the sky and the way that the moons are handled in Elden Ring, both of those pretty heavily to me imply that it is there and it's just darkened by this shadow magic. And then that also gets into what I think is going on with shadow magic in the moons. And now that I kind of pieced that together, I'm even more convinced that, it's probably still up there, but darkened. At least that's my take.
That's more scientifically accurate. It should be most of it up there. If the whole thing got, first of all, for a comet to obliterate the moon, the comet would need to be the size of the moon, which makes the comet a runaway planet. And I do want to point out that in Thundar, it is a runaway planet. There is a red comet that streaks between the Earth and the moon and messes up all of the Earth's technology and plunges us back into an age of swords and sorcery. And the moon is left cracked. And you can see it in the sky in Thundar, this cracked moon. It's in several pieces. I think the book Seven Eves might have been inspired by that, for the people that know that. However, the point is, it's a runaway planet in Thundar. So I have wondered about that, like maybe it was. But the thing is, that would have obliterated all life on Earth, technically. So again, we don't know. George thinks about this stuff magically, and he's said that many times. Like the explanation for the cycle of the seasons is magical. Yeah. It's loosely tied to stuff like volcanoes and ice and obsidian and meteors, but it's magical. So what we're talking about here is it makes a lot more sense if there's most of it up in the sky, a few pieces of it fell to Earth, because that's just too much moon. Like it would form an asteroid belt, not asteroid belt, a ring, sorry. I guess that's what technically.
I was going to bring that up at some point, is like if it actually could have destroyed the moon, we would have at least heard about a time where there should have been a ring. Like, two moons blow up, you're going to have a ring.
Elden Ring really is kind of giving things away. I feel like. Yeah.
So I really do think, because they already drew on such similar inspirations and they were fans of George, I really do think they went up to him and they're like, hey, can you build us something that is just like your world building? It's awesome, and we'll twist it into our game world. Like, we'll work with you to do that, but we want the same system set up in our world. And he did that. I think that's what they paid him for behind the scenes. Like, they probably won't directly ever say that, but that sounds like, if you piece together everything, like, it could be what they talk about.
And I think it makes sense just because, again, George keeps all of this magic in the background. We're not maybe going to get full explanations of a lot of this stuff. We're left to piece it out for fun, because George is a puzzle guy and he likes leaving us these puzzles to figure out.
Right.
So given that we'll never have a full astronomy lesson from the Green Men or whatever, it's possible Archmaester Marwyn, I guess, would be the one to teach it. It makes sense that George might use some of these ideas and even more developed high magic versions of these ideas for something like Elden Ring. So essentially what Uncle Benjamin is saying here, and someone in the chat said you look a little Euronish too, but you're far too kind and nice and sweet of a person to be Euron, but I digress. In Elden Ring, there was two moons. One got messed up. It is now sort of hidden and shadowed, and you're saying there's like a shadow world where you can see it more, and there's one of the endings of the game where you can reveal that moon. So this is
Yep.
all really pregnant with suggestive import for Ice and Fire, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's so similar to what I felt like the clues were already pointing at with A Song of Ice and Fire that it would just be kind of ridiculous if George wasn't riffing on the same thing. Because it's like, it proves it's what he's thinking about. He's got people strapped to trees, casting out shadows, and at the end, you replace the power of the tree with the power of this moon, which you like lift this shadowy veil off of and reveal in the sky. And the moons are channels for these outer gods, which in Elden Ring they do seem to be like outer gods, and in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think it's going to be kind of up in the air. Are there outer gods? Is the universe just magic? Are the moons magic? Because for centuries people have been storing their souls there the same way they store them in the Weirwoods, and that's what's given the moons magic over time because death can pay for life. So like the moons became magic because people worship them. Like I think George is going to leave that firmly up in the air in A Song of Ice and Fire, but I think he's going to give us enough hints that like the moons have something to do with the magic and Ice and Fire.
So that's probably a good place to go into, and this is all just basics. You know, there's two moon myths. Nissa Nissa's cry, of course, breaks the moon in the Azor Ahai legend. There's the Carthene origin of dragons myth that I just referred to. There's places of moon worship, such as the Temple of the Moon Singers. House Arin basically qualifies. House of Black and
Yeah.
White. There's many houses with moon sigils. But yeah, we're here to talk about, is there something going on with the moon? I basically summarized all these questions. So why do we think they're magical moons of ice and fire that exist in some sort of magical system of cosmic harmony with the weirwood trees, and maybe, just maybe, act as conveyances to and from the spirit void, to and from the void for spirits and alien intelligences? When you first brought up this idea of souls and spirits living in the moon, it definitely sounded a little far-fetched, as many of my ideas sound to people when they first hear them. And
Yeah.
it was really when I thought about Lovecraft that it clicked in. Because in Lovecraft, there's always alien intelligences out in the stars. That's where they live. And whenever the stars come to Earth, those spirit entities are coming to Earth. We've seen that over and over. Tim has talked about this extensively. Shout out to Grey Waste Tim and his YouTube channel that you should all be subscribed to, obviously. So not only could there be, like, well, if there's alien intelligences of some kind in the comets and stars, then why not the moon? And
Yeah, exactly.
once you have the comet slamming into the moon, that's really where it becomes like, okay, the comet, if anything, has a Lovecraftian outer world god on it. It's the damn comet. And that thing hit the moon. And what we got, as far as the meteorites go, was a new thing. Not just pieces of moon that was impregnated by the comet. And there's always that magical, alchemical, sexual metaphor in all of this. It's two things combining to make a new thing. So if the messed up moon isn't floating in the sky somewhere, the thing that, it's definitely some of it on the Earth. The oily black stone, for all intents and purposes, are either pieces of the moon or pieces of Earth rock that have been poisoned by the moon meteors. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
So there is a remnant of the first moon that still exists. At least, if nothing else, on the planet Toast. There may be a parallel in the sky. It may be that the red comet is the remnant of the moon. That's an idea that both of us have entertained and we'll talk about today as well. And so when the comet comes back, it's bringing back that first moon energy, which you're talking about might have like beamed spirits into the dragons so they could be born, right?
Right. That's what I was just about to go into is, yeah, so if you imagine what you were just saying, a comet being called into the moon, if the moon is where, let's say the moon singers in ancient religions had been storing their souls in there for a long time, basically the way that the weirwoods are. And if you burn a weirwood, you could do magic with it. You're using up the souls in it. So if you slam a giant comet into the moon, or if you drag that moon so close to the sun that it breaks open, or you cloak that moon in dark shadow magic, any of those things or any combination of those things could be a giant sacrificial magical spell using the souls in the moon, and that's probably a spell powerful enough to create the first dragons for Valyria. So that could have been what darkened and corrupted the fiery moon. Like that legend tracks magically, like when you think about how it works, if there are souls in the moon.
And even if there aren't souls, if it's simply a source of magic, then it still makes sense that if the comet is a remnant of the moon, that it returning brought magic back. Because as we're going to get into real quick, there are probably moons of ice and fire, since there were two, and everything is ice and fire in this story. There's many reasons to think so, but you'll excuse me for putting on antlers in the middle of your speech, Michael. I just felt like there was a lot of negative space up here on the camera, and this is kind of that's filling it better for me. So I wore. See, Michael, like you new aged YouTubers have got us old timers on our toes. You didn't wear antlers in your Green Man Others video. I did. See, I stop at nothing to try to stay ahead of you guys.
Yeah, no, I did not. I gotta up my dress up game.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look like Benjamin Stark, so you can kind of just roll out of bed in a peach polo and be like, fabulous. And shout out to Eldrick Stoneskin. When I say you new YouTubers, I'm definitely talking about him too. So why do we think that the moons might be magic? It starts with the idea of nature magic in Ice and Fire. Like we said, all the magic seems to flow through the natural elements. This is not a new idea. Ice and fire, but also water and the air. Because Euron is doing blood magic to get wind currents that are favorable, and the Green Seers talk through the wind. Shout out to King Crimson, I think. I talk to the wind. No, is that Emerson, Lake and Palmer or King Crimson? Anyway, two people in the audience know what I'm talking about. So the magic can be channeled through trees, through blood. Obviously, blood might be the most important one. Shadow, I listed. Also, obsidian and meteorites, two different kinds of stone. Dawn is a meteorite. It's magical. It says it has magical powers, and obsidian obviously does. So basically, it seems as though George enjoys funneling magic through the elements, or is showing us that they could either be sources or conduits, right?
Right. Yeah, that seems to be like what it is, and yeah, it makes sense if there's like these celestial bodies that have this magical power. A lot of the Children of the Forest magic also makes sense because the Earth is also a big celestial body that might have its own inherent magic too, and they could be tapping into that. There are specific reasons that I think shadow magic seems to be tapping into the moons because of the color matching and because of, just various things like that, all the weird moon connections. But yeah, it all does just track pretty well. Muted.
Thank you. The other part of this is the cosmic highway theory, which I feel like is headcanon for most people who've thought about this. The fact that Melisandre and Bloodraven can see each other is the main one that shows this. Like, they're clearly using different forms of magic, but Melisandre can see Bloodraven, and she's like, oh, he sees me. So she's seeing Bloodraven and Bran. The TV show gave us Night King and Bran meeting on the dream plane, which I totally think is right and can happen in some form. So basically it seemed...
I think it happened with Jon and Bran in the books. I think a very similar thing happened when Jon sees Bran as the Weirwood sapling, and he like reaches out and touches Ghost. I think that was probably a similar contact.
Yes, technically, because the Direwolf psychic network is separate from the Weirwood network. Those are different things. And Bran is using the Weirwood net to awaken Jon's skin changer magic. So there's some interesting stuff there. But basically, it seems that if things as different as fire magic and Weirwood magic can be used, and people could see each other on the astral plane, and like the other part of this is that everybody sees the major events coming. The Red Wedding is seen by the Ghost of Highheart and the Undying and Patchface. Patchface is getting messages from the Deep Ones. The Undying are using shade trees.
Hmm.
on and on. Melisandre, fire vision. So there seems to be, that's why we say conduits. I think we'd both prefer conduits. There seems to be a universal source. The hinge of the
Yeah.
world is the other part of this. Melisandre is at the wall. It's a hinge of the world made of ice or ice and weirwood, maybe some black
Yeah.
stone. And she's able to, it's like, oh, my shadow of fire magic would be stronger here, even more so than a shy. So it seems like, there's one mana, there's one source, and many conduits.
Yeah, and the House of the Black and White kind of hints at that because it's got the black and white doors on either side. If there's a black and white moon that are the two conduits for ice and fire magic, that also lines up. And when you go into the House of Black and White, they tell you the truth that all of the gods are the same god, which probably means that both of these branches of magic are the same magic. They just look a bit different because they're channeled through two different moons and they've been used differently by different cultures throughout time. And yeah, I think that's kind of what's going on. Every little area gets their own flavor of how they use this magic and tap into it, and that develops culturally, but it's probably channeling through, the universal magic.
And so why wouldn't the moons be part of this?
Right.
If it includes, meteorites, those are rocks. It's not just the sort of ephemeral elements of fire and ice or whatever, like literally rocks that fall from space have magic. So why wouldn't the moons be magic, especially the one that got hit by a comet? So we're on solid ground. As Michael likes to say, I don't think this is far-fetched at all. I think this is actually the most logical explanation for what's going on.
Yeah,
That's your...
it's far-fetched. It's far-fetched that George is writing this many coincidences. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
That should be like your tagline on your YouTube channel, like in tiny text across the bottom.
Yeah.
All right. So you have to forgive me for occasionally poking fun at you.
No, all good.
I'm clearly very enamored with everything that you're doing, and I'm so excited to just see other people approaching the story, like your Brand the Builder video, which is another one I recommend. That's from earlier this week. Michael took the same sort of anthropological approach that I do with the ancient myths, which is like, well, is there one Brand the Builder? Who knows? But somebody founded House Stark and built some stuff, obviously, or else this myth wouldn't exist. And you sort of work from there. So that's good stuff.
Like
Good stuff.
George compares it to how George Washington slept at every little inn that you go and visit if you're in one of the 13 original colonies. But it's also like, well, okay, of course he didn't actually do all that, but he did stay at random places and he did a lot of cool stuff. And that's why everyone wants to claim that he stayed here. And that's why everyone wants to claim that Bran the Builder built this random little castle that they don't know who built it. Because, like, yeah, why wouldn't you just try and claim it was Bran the Builder at some point? But he was probably doing some cool stuff,
Well, the relationship between mythology and what we think of as truth is an endlessly fascinating thing to talk about because, cultural myths have their own truths. They're not exactly literal, but they're not disconnected from literal truth. Like the point of that George Washington myth is that he's an honest person. He's a respectable person. I don't know everything about George Washington. I'm sure he did some stuff that was wrong and all that. All these founding fathers had slaves and all this stuff. But the man was a leader, obviously. I don't want to get into like putting people from 200 years ago on trial or whatever. But the point is, like, these cultural myths have a basis in reality, usually. And when we talk about ancient myths, it's the more important thing becomes the values that are communicated. So was George Washington honest? I don't know. But the people who made the myth wanted to create this image of the leader of America as this honest person in contrast to, the lying, double-crossing King of England. And so it's a cultural myth trying to set a tone for the country, which was trying to get on its feet. So there's a purpose there, right? So we're talking about the dentures, right? His dentures, the teeth were pulled from slate, right? Yeah. There's a lot of dark stuff in America's past, no doubt. But without getting lots of things to research on YouTube, if you so choose. I'll just say that.
Bran the Builder probably did some very questionable things as well.
Well, and that's kind of the point.
Draw it back in, yeah.
Right,
Like he was
and there's
probably also strapping
Bran
people up
thinks when
similar
he's
to
in the
that.
crypts, he thinks, well, some of these Starks had done terrible things. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Night
Yep.
King might have been a Stark. So
Right. Right. And some of those who have done terrible things that Bran thinks about might have been casting some others. If, others are Weirwood Shadow babies.
yeah, there's a lot. I've got some hard questions for Bloodraven. Should I ever run into him?
Yeah. How long has it been since you were in contact with Shiera Seastar exactly, Bloodraven? I have some questions here. Were you or were you not in contact with that woman after you were strapped to this tree? That's all I want to know. That's all I want to know.
So real quick, Michael, let me ask you. Okay, never mind. I'm looking at some audio stuff, but I think I'm good. Sorry, I'm seeing ghosts a
Okay.
little bit. I've had some really bad issues with them. Okay.
Yeah, no, we can always just ask Chad again quick. Are we still sounding good? Let us know. But yeah.
So the celestial axis, the cosmic tree. Okay, this is one of the main reasons to think that the moons and the weirwoods are connected, and this is why they are connected from like George Martin's perspective. Why would you write it this way? It's
Yeah.
because of what the cosmic tree represents. So the world tree, the cosmic tree, is basically it's a line that goes from the observer in the northern hemisphere up to the pole star. And this forms an imaginary pole, an axis, if you will, a pillar, around which the canopy of stars appears to turn. And so this invisible trunk is the trunk of the tree, and the spread of the stars is the heavenly canopy. And this is why in Norse myth we have Yggdrasil, the world tree, which is connected to the nine realms. If you see any pictures of Yggdrasil, you see there's three in the roots and three in the middle and three up top, and they're all connected to the parts of the tree. That's the idea. Like this trunk unites the heavens and the earth. Or I pointed the wrong way. The heavens are up and the earth is down. I guess if you're on the South Pole, whatever. So
Yeah.
that's the that's the cosmic tree, and it's important because again, it's a conduit between the heaven and the earth. So when we talk about people using a magic tree to voyage through the stars and fly through time and all that stuff, this is why this mythology is associated. So you have essentially shamanic rituals using psychedelic drugs being done in front of trees, but they're thinking about the tree as a sort of mental metaphor to propel their consciousness into the stars. That's so there's kind of like yeah, this is all basically shamanic ritual turned into metaphor. That's most of Norse mythology, to be honest.
Right. Right. And yeah, and you can see like even and it's so clear that George is doing his own riff on that because literally part of the thing that the world tree does is also separates the realms of ice and fire. It separates like nine different realms. There's the realm of ice and realm of fire that during Ragnarok and the cycle of rebirth they meet and clash and everything goes crazy. Basically all the gods die and everything can be reborn. And it's like, oh well, that seems like a lot like what George is doing, so why wouldn't the tree work in a similar mythological way? Like, he's clearly riffing on all of this.
Yes, and George is making it very clear that he's aware of this stuff with his use of the Ice Dragon constellation, which had a previous form in his older works that was called the Ice Wagon. So let me explain this for you guys who don't know. The Ice Dragon in Ice and Fire is a northern constellation that contains the pole star, and the pole star is a blue star. It is said to either be the eye of the Ice Dragon or the eye of the rider of the Ice Dragon, because it's myth and there's always different versions. Now, in the real world, the pole star moves a little bit because of something called the cycle of precession, because the Earth is doing something like this over the course of 26,000 years. And so the pole star, it changes every so often. Right now it's Polaris, but it used to be in the constellation Draco. And so that means, I believe it was Alpha Draconis, but it was one of the ones in Draco. Draco is, of course, It's the shape of a serpent, and it's associated with dragons and serpents and all that stuff. It wraps kind of around the current North Pole, Polaris, partly. And so when Martin talks about a northern dragon constellation that contains the pole star, it's just his version of Draco. The same as his Sword of the Morning is just Orion, and the Moon Maid is probably Virgo, and all this stuff. So he's just taking our constellations and futzing with them a little bit. Now, the interesting thing is that in Polaris, I believe it's Polaris, is part of the Big Dipper. And the Big Dipper is another northern constellation that currently essentially wheels around the North Pole. And it is seen in many countries as a wagon or a cart or something like that. And so George's ice wagon essentially is the Big Dipper. And in the older, before he came up with the Ice Dragon constellation, in his older stories, I forget which one, somebody can remind me, he had a constellation called the Ice Wagon. And it's the same thing. The pole star is the eye of the driver of the ice wagon, and it carries the souls of the dead to the afterlife. So Polaris is in Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper. Thank you. I always mix up the details. I appreciate you guys. And so essentially, he has this constellation, the Ice Wagon, that takes the souls to the afterlife. So he's working with this northern pole star astronomy pretty strongly in both his previous stories and with the Ice Dragon. And listen to this quote about the Ice Dragon. These colossal beasts, many times larger than the dragons of Valyria, are said to be made of living ice with eyes of pale blue crystal and vast translucent wings through which the moon and stars can be glimpsed as they wheel across the sky. Think about it as a constellation that's wheeling, like literally turning like the Great Wheel, which is how the Little Dipper is seen, across the sky. And you can see, of course, everything through them. Its wings, it literally is the sky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's many times larger than the dragons of Valyria, those things are huge, huge. And if dragons also come from the moon and the others are made of ice and could come from the moon, maybe in the ancient past someone figured out how to get dragons out of the icy moon the same way they did out of the fire moon, and that would be why there are these giant dragons made of ice in the legends. Muted. You're muted.
I was just saying, I think the dragons that come from the ice moon are the others. So I think this ice dragon is essentially kind of like just a symbolism, you know?
That does track too. Like, I'm thinking it literally could be that if one moon can produce dragons and shadows, the other moon probably can too. But I do actually like, for what's relevant in this story, it's going to be that the others are probably the icy version of dragons, because I kind of did talk about that in my video a little bit today too, where if the others are Weirwood shadow babies, suddenly they're much more like dragons. They're a powerful thing that whoever has the power to control this magic can use, and suddenly you can end up with multiple factions of them that would fight it out with each other, and lots of cool, interesting things that I think a lot of people don't really think about when they think of the others.
So yeah, I'm biting my tongue here so that we can get through a couple things before we get to some other things. But yes, this is going to be a fun one. So the other thing about Yggdrasil is that it is Odin's horse. It's not only his tree that's like a ladder, that goes throughout the realms. It literally translates to Odin's horse, and he's riding the tree because he's hung on the tree. So it's his gallows horse, yada, yada. He's got a similar myth of a horse called Sleipnir, which is an 8-legged horse that also allows Odin to ride throughout the realms. So it actually collapses into the same metaphor of a horse that the shaman rides through the realms. This is based, according to Mircea Eliade, it's based on the drumming, the ritual drumming that would accompany the shaman in his spirit rituals. This is the hoofbeats of an invisible horse that the shaman is riding. And you can see how that makes sense, because the drumming is a hypnotic device to, bring on the altered state. And so this is in inspiration for Sleipnir and Yggdrasil as a horse. And then in Ice and Fire, you'll see a bunch of horses, gray horses in particular, that are going to come up. But let's see here, including Dany's horse that she rides. But so the Weirwoods, they have heavy moon symbolism. And in particular, they seem to be reaching into the heavens and attacking the moon quite frequently in some quotes that we're going to read and that you guys are probably familiar with, scratching at the face of the moon, trying to pull it down. So it's like, yeah, I think Martin could be suggesting more than a figurative description here. That it could literally be some sort of magical harmonic system where we once had two moons of ice and fire that maybe governed the even movement of the seasons, and the tree would be in the center of all this because that's what the cosmic axis is. It's in the center of everything.
Yeah, no, that does track incredibly well. And like, if the seasons are fixed by the end of the books, at this point, I do kind of assume it's going to be with a healthy new world tree and possibly with that moon, like, if not replaced in the sky, maybe the shadow is lifted off of it, or maybe it's meant to be shadowed the entire time, but that seems a bit weird. So I don't know. It could be something like that one ending of Elden Ring where you like lift the veil off of that shadowed moon, and maybe that's how the cycle returns back to normal.
It could be that if the red comet is the moon, that it needs to hit the other moon and just sort of combine or something into one moon.
That could be too. Yeah, it could be something like that.
I've thought about can we blast off the oily stone from the surface of the earth somehow? That seems like something that would help, but I don't know how we do that.
Yeah, well, okay, so if you could lift the shadow magic veil over the moon, kind of like Ronnie does in Elden Ring, would the shadow magic veil lift off of those stones and then they stop drinking in the light, and it's like, oh, our houses are normal rock now, I guess. We can't do magic anymore. Oh well. Like,
that would be interesting. That would be interesting. I've even had someone propose that the moon is floating over a shy very low in orbit, and it's locked to Earth, and that's why it's shadowed.
Okay.
But I can't get around the idea that we wouldn't see it.
Yeah, I still think it's probably more to... And that still wouldn't explain why the stone itself drinks in the light. Like, it feels more like it's all cloaked with a veil of shadow that does that. Indeed.
I've got some interesting ideas about a shy to throw at you in just a second. So another reason to think that the moons and the trees are tied together is that the moon disasters and the magic trees seem to all be related. So one occurred around the time of the Long Night. That was Nissa Nissa's murder. Okay. So we have something, the moon destruction and the Long Night intrinsically connected, and also Nissa Nissa's murder and the moon destruction intrinsically connected. Like, that myth is encouraging us to think there's a link, especially once you figure out that Nissa Nissa may have been a child of the forest. And that's too big of a theory for me to give all the evidence for just off the top of my head. Right. I mean, I could do it, but, you know.
I know how it goes. I just had to pull like 4 tangents out of my last video to get it under 2 hours. So.
It's brutal. It's a rough life that we lead, truly. But if Nissa Nissa is a child of the forest and Azor Ahai is killing her to invade the Weirwood Net, which has been my theory for years and years, that only seems to find more evidence, that it makes a lot of sense. Like, if the moon is breaking when we are murdering Nissa Nissa, then that tells you, like, well, there must have been a link between the moon and something having to do with this ritual. And the answer is that Nissa Nissa is a child of the forest, or a green woman. She is a Weirwood avatar, and this whole blood magic ritual is no doubt being performed in a grove of Weirwood with her against a Weirwood, something like that. That could be the method by which human sorcerers reach into the heavens and mess things up, essentially.
That I would agree roughly in like the structure of that. The destruction of the moons came in. I think it might have been 2 separate events. The birth of the dragons done possibly by the Valyrians, and then the Nissa Nissa thing could have been done by someone who corrupted the original Weirwoods in Westeros a long time ago, potentially. There's also the story of the blood betrayal, Which it's like that sounds very similar to Nisa Nisa, obviously, and it's just like this idea of betrayal and also potentially like incredibly powerful magical like selfishness, uh like corrupting the world order to take power for some reason, right? Like the Weirwoods, the way that bodies are strapped to them, it seems like the goal of people tapping into the Weirwood magic may have been to cheat death and you survive beyond it. And so like the destruction of the natural order to do that as an individual is probably a thing that George is pointing out is throwing off the rest of the world, and you shouldn't do that. And especially too if they were doing something like, let's just say, okay, what if Nisa Nisa's like a resurrected, like maybe if Melisandre was some sort of, this is just me spitballing, but if she was like killed and resurrected to create this icy form that could allow her to cast others so that they could take power, and that's why she had to be killed, and that's what was so terrible about it, is it's just like making the dragons. You did this terrible sacrifice of your family members and people you love to put their souls into a magic spell to give you power. And both of those events could have been different events on the ice and fire side, but I think both of them happened, and the whole system's all messed up, and the whole system might need to be fixed.
There's definitely an open question as far as like how many cycles of events and how many meteor falls and all that stuff, no doubt. The Hammer of the Waters, though, is something that we agree about. As far as like, we both think of the pact of cooperation between the humans and the children as something that makes sense happening during the long night. And as you've pointed out, the idea that the children had something to do with the creation of the others, that makes sense as something that would not happen after the pact. Like,
right.
The timeline
Yeah,
works
why?
much better if the humans and children are fighting, the others are created, the others get out of control, and then the humans and children have to team up, the good humans,
Yeah.
to get control of the others or stabilize the system or something.
Yeah, and that's why you have a pact and an era where the Night's Watch is being armed with obsidian by the children, and the founder Stark probably lived at that time because, well, the Stark dynasty has been in charge with probably the magical backing of the Weirwoods ever since then. So, like, that's probably the guy who signed the pact. Like,
the formation of the Night's Watch is so obviously the same thing as the pact, because it's literally the Night's Watch swearing their oaths of loyalty to the Weirwood trees, to the Green Seers. I will do this, I will do this, I will do that. And the whole purpose of it is to fight the others. So, yeah, like they're literally a watch that guards the Weirwood organism at the Night Fort, just like the Green Men are.
I kind of feel like the old ways as an entire culture were a result of the pact, whether all of it was directly agreed or the immediate fallout. Like, this is when the old ways were laid down, pretty much all of it, it would seem.
And so I came about this theory because I'm looking at moon meteors. And once I figured out that the moon cracked open and dropped some pieces on Earth, I'm looking around for other legends that are records of impact events, and the Hammer of the Waters is just super obvious. It's such a big land collapse. It's too big to have been caused by an earthquake. If it did all happen at once, which maybe it didn't. And maybe it's a magic earthquake that's too big. That's always possible. But it would make a lot of sense if that was a meteor impact, especially the idea of a hammer. A hammer is a thing made of iron that smashes down and breaks things. That's a meteor. Bloodstone Island, et cetera, et cetera. The important thing is that if the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor impact, well, how was the Hammer of the Waters called down? Through the blood magic killing of children of the forest on the Isle of Faces. So if Nissa Nissa was a child of the forest, these become the same legend. Somebody is using a blood magic ritual, children of the forest, and Weirwoods, and then the meteor hammer falls from the sky and breaks the crap out of the earth. That's the story. Right?
Yeah. And like, especially if they did call the hammer down multiple times, I think it does imply that, like, at least when you're willing to do incredibly large blood sacrifices, you can do some incredibly crazy magic like this. And there were desperate times where this magic was done, but it doesn't seem to have been a good thing in the long run for anyone.
And so it's like, how would how would you, it's always been the question, well, how would a human magician on Earth steer a comet into a moon or have any effect on the stars? I think the best answer is that they're already linked because of this magical natural system where the moons are governing the seasons. And so if you mess with the world tree, which is connected right to the Earth, because the weirwood roots probably do go through like the whole planet, then this would, if you magically corrupt the weirwood trees, you might be able to affect the heavens because it was already a system. So that all makes sense to me as far as stitching together some of my early theories and making it all cohesively work. It's like, we're committing blood magic, we're killing children of the forest, it's a weirwood defilement, and this is disrupting the cosmic order, leading to a celestial apocalypse of some kind. Then we have the Grey King mythology. There's a couple things here, but the main one is the Thunderbolt myth. So the Thunderbolt myth puts it all together. There's a storm god that lashes. First of all, the Grey King taunts the storm god. So he, like so many of our characters, he's a hubristic. He's challenging the heavens like during God's grief, Bloodstone Emperor casting down the true gods, etc., etc. There's always that note. So he, Grey King, taunts the storm god. The storm god lashes down with a thunderbolt. The thunderbolt sets a tree ablaze, and that's how Grey King possesses the fire and shares fire brings fire to the earth, I think is the words. So it's Prometheus evocative language. And so what you see here is, a tree got set on fire and then mankind possessed the fire of the gods. Well, weirwood magic is the magic that mankind can possess that makes them like gods. And George Martin describes the bloody leaves, usually like bloody hands, also as a blaze of flame a couple times. Jojen talks about there's a power in the wood that's as strong as fire, etc., etc. So this flaming tree that gives the fire of the gods to mankind seems a clear metaphor for a weirwood tree. And Grey King has all these other weirwood clues in his mythology, such as slaying the demon tree Ig and Naga's ribs, which are petrified weirwood. It's a boat hull, etc., etc. And so it's like, well, what the myth is telling us is that something from the heavens came down to the earth. And that's when something changed about the weirwood net that enabled mankind to access it. You see what I'm saying?
That tracks. Yeah, and the Grey King definitely has that weirwood, like the Black Gate face is described as like basically old Grey King style. I think you've talked about that in the past, where the Grey King supposedly just aged and aged and aged, and then that's what the Black Gate's supposed to look like. So yeah, another thing that I've thought about recently that is kind of interesting is like, if you take the faceless men seriously and all the gods are the same, right? Well, there's all these different places where we see dueling gods, ice and fire, the Great Other, and the Lord of Light, the Storm God, and the Grey King. So it's like, well, maybe the one half of that is just the same power source as the ice, like Storm King and Grey King could just be a different name for ice and fire, manifesting differently culturally because it's near the ocean. But that would literally just make the Grey King's magic the same exact magic as the weirwood magic. So yeah, it tracks for me.
There's basically no question to me that Grey King is some kind of green seer. And I think really the biggest thing about his story is in the same way that you're like, well, was there a Bran the Builder? Who's the Grey King? I don't know. Yeah. Was there somebody sitting on a weirwood throne for 1,000 years and petrifying? Yeah, there was. And there are more of those people, under Winterfell or the Wall or wherever. So, right. So we've got this all happening together. Some modification of the weirwood net is happening that allows humans to access it at the same time and place that the fire is coming from the heavens. So you're really starting to, again, pull the Azor High myth and the Hammer of the Waters legend all together. It's the same thing. There's a blood magic ritual. There's a defilement of the weirwood net, and there's meteors falling from the sky. And so when we go to Dany's Hatching of the Dragons, we see the smoky stallion of Drogo. it's combining all the Yggdrasil symbolism in one. And this is great. There's no weirwood here, but they build a wooden pyre that's kind of more like a tower. It's got 3 levels, and they lay it out from north to south, from ice to fire. So it's this sort of ritualistic 4 corners of the earth wooden tower. But then when they light it on fire, we get this column of smoke and ash that climbs up to the stars. So this is now recreating the cosmic tree, but as a smoke tree, a pillar of ash. But Yggdrasil is, say it with me, an ash tree. And so George is doing this. He's like, it's an ash tree that has the fire of the gods. And so he's made his version of it look fiery, the weirwood. I've compared it to Moses' burning bush, which burns forever but isn't consumed and speaks with the voice of God. The weirwood is like bleeding forever or burning forever, but not being consumed because it's eternal and speaks with the voice of God, right?
Yep. Yeah, that tracks pretty well to me. Yeah.
And so at the pyre, what we've got is this symbol of a smoky tree. But then Drogo gets on his smoky stallion. And remember, Yggdrasil is Odin's horse. And so he rides this gray stallion that's made of the pillar up to the red comet, where he rides the red comet as his celestial steed. So George is doing the whole thing. He's showing us Yggdrasil as an ash tree. He's showing us that it transmits stuff from heavens to earth. We know Drogo's spirit went up. No, I mean, in thinking. And Michael is suggesting that stuff came down from the comet or the moon and went into the dragons. So...
Yeah, and I think like that imagery of Drogo's spirit going up into if this is a moon meteor or if it's just a comet, either way, it's, I think, hinting at that idea of, there could be magic that would send the souls up there to rest. That may be a reasonable place that someone would send the spirit of a loved one, which would make defiling it so terrible. But I also do think, like, good chance Drogo's spirit ended up in the dragons as well as some of the spirits. Like, there might be a merging of multiple magical spirits in there, right? Like, there's the 3 heads has the dragon. Well, if the others are icy shadow babies that are dragon-like, you have the mother, the father, and the weirwood. That could be 3 consciousnesses or life forces that need to come together to make another. There might be multiple sacrifices needed to make the dragons. But I do like that idea a lot, of the pyre being the tree that carries Drogo up there.
It's interesting to go a little further than just, the comet passing by strengthened magic and enabled the dragons to be born. It's interesting, to think about going further with that. So the other thing about the ashes is that not only do we see the pillar of ash and the smoky stallion, when the fire dies down, Dany is sitting there amongst the ashes with her dragons. And we see this language used a bunch of times with Azor Ahai people. They're always in the ashes. So, like, for example, Azor Ahai, Melisandre says, even an ember in the ashes can spark a great blaze, talking about Azor Ahai's rebirth. Beric is reborn in a grove of ash trees with the taste of fire in his mouth, quote unquote. So that George is really begging us to notice the whole idea of a burning tree and an ash tree and say, Azor Ahai is reborn from the ashes, meaning from the weirwood. And so we've got Bloodraven. He's the last, his red eyes like the last coal in a dying fire. It seems as though when this is all done, there's a dragon spirit or something that has gone into the weirwood tree.
Yeah,
and so
that could be, I mean, and Bloodraven is kind of that too, as I'm sure you mentioned, and you've since I heard you mention that, I also did notice when I was gathering quotes, editing my most recent video, there's the line where Ghost's eyes match Melisandre's eyes. So it's like, that's hinting maybe that, like, Jon also has that little bit of fire magic in his ice. That's why he got a wolf with these fire magic looking eyes, even though the wolf is ice magic-y. it does track pretty well. That little bit of fire inside the ice.
Yes, and where to go next? Where to get this? Okay, so the point is that there may be all the stuff about Azor Ahai and similar people going into the Weirwood Net and being reborn from the Weirwood Net could also apply to the meteor level of things, is what I was trying to get to. Meaning that on a cosmic level, there's this red comet that hits the moon and enters the moon, just like Azor Ahai enters the Weirwood Net. But then those moon meteors fall to Earth and enter the Earth, and the whole cycle sort of repeats, and it's impregnating the Earth. And we see, like in Ashai is poisoned. The Earth is impregnated in different symbolic ways, which is a classic mythical theme. And so, yeah, there could be an alien intelligence that came down from the comet and is now residing in the Weirwood Net or in the minds of the others or something like that.
I do very much enjoy the idea of it being like some alien intelligence or outer god. Just quickly though, because this just came to mind, thinking about if there are indeed like souls of the dead ancestors in the moon, if you know your ancestors are up there, you can also kind of view a spell that breaks the moon and pulls it down to Earth as trying to bring the souls of your ancestors back, which is kind of like necromancy, which is kind of like all of this magic that they're doing, and also fits in with the like whole theme of trying to avoid death by magical means. So like that's just another level that I just thought of as you were talking there, that kind of works, calling down the moon rocks literally being trying to call back the spirits of your dead ancestors who you put there.
That's an interesting spin on it. I hadn't thought about that. I've always thought about it as a moon goddess. And so I think about like Bloodstone Emperor as like parading the moon goddess's corpse, you know, working magic with her corpse, essentially the oily black stone being pieces of the moon.
That works sort of as well, but yeah.
These are all things you should not do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's also some scenes where the moon appears to drown and come again, connected to Long Night language. The Ironborn talk about making a new king when the moon drowns and comes again. Dany basically performs that at the womb of the world. She's pregnant, the moon of Drogo's life, and she goes into the black water and comes back out. Simultaneously, the moon is reflected on the water in a parallel image. And I think this is all... Mostly, I think that's Nissa language of like, dying and coming back as Night's Queen and stuff like that. But
I got something here. Okay, so Dany, the moon, goes into the black water and comes back out. But the moon is reflecting, which means you see two lit up moons. So I think if the other moon is going to have its shadow lifted, at some point Daenerys' spirit is going to be involved in that magical spell. Like the spell that restores everything. Dany's death, I think, will be involved in that. So her going into the blackness and coming back out could be her spirit literally restoring that second moon that's in the blackness. And you're seeing it now reflecting off the water because you can now see it in the sky again. So like, if we end the story with Dany getting stabbed and her becoming the moon, which is, I think, part of why she has such moon symbolism potentially, she could go in and all of a sudden there are these two moons you see in the sky, and that scene could, look really cool in hindsight.
And something you said in your video is essentially that when you talk about the moon containing spirits, that might be the same thing as the Weirwood Net containing spirits. That might just be like a joint sort of repository, or like the Weirwoods are channeling magic from the moon, etc., etc. So
they're the antennas. Think satellite, and then you got your little antenna receiver, and they amplify and receive it. They're your Wi-Fi router, basically, for the Weirwood.net. But the Weirwood.net comes from the moon.
Come from the moon. And so one of the main reasons why we think there are ice and fire moons, going with the idea that there were two moons, is because the dragons and others are both moon children, and they are coded to ice and fire. So the dragons come from the moon, of course, according to the Carthene legend. It's just straight up. It says the dragons literally come from the moon. But the others come from a moon pale maiden. Night's queen is skin pale as the moon, and so they are moon. They are children of the moon as well.
Very coded as Melisandre, but icy. And if Melisandre's magic is channeled through the shadowed moon, and then Night's Queen is channeled through the one that you see, well, that would make sense why she looks that way and is like Melisandre.
We'll get into Night's Queen in a second.
Yeah.
But to your point, everything is paralleled. We have moon queens of ice and fire on both sides. And the original Night's Queen may have just been a flipped version of Melisandre. Yeah, that's an old theory from Durrandon from the Westeros.org forums. I believe he's the originator of that. And that Night's Queen figurine came out right around that time, and we all made a big deal out of it. I think that was like 2014 or something.
Okay.
So yeah, it was cool to see you bring that up.
That one's such a huge little nugget into George's mind, because it's like he didn't do it for no reason. Like, he specifically was like, "Hey, make an icy Mel. I can't tell you why."
Yeah, no, whatever it is, it's indicative that he's thinking about an ice priestess that would be like Melisandre. Like, it's not that hard to think about. So,
right.
And the shadow babies and the others are so clearly parallels. But let me keep going with this thing here with the dragons and the others. So the others come from a moon maiden. The dragons come from the moon. But the dragons, of course, also come from a moon maiden, because Dany is the moon of Drogo's life, and she is the mother of the dragons. So the parallels are very tight. Dragons are like flaming or Valyrian swords. Those parallels are extensive. And the others are sword slim. They are also very much like a picture of dawn. They're described in all the same words. They have milk glass bones. Their swords are alive with moonlight, where dawn is alive with light. The others are milky white. Dawn is pale as milk glass. So the others are like ice swords, just as the dragons are like flaming swords. The dragons are also compared to comets, bleeding stars. The dragon's tail is a name for the comet. Old Nan says the comet means dragons. And then we have the others, of course, have star eyes. So an invasion of others is like a meteor shower. So they basically, just as the dragons come from the moon and are like meteor swords that are falling from the moon, so too for the others. They come from the moon, and they're like an invasion of icy swords and cold stars. So it's exactly the same symbolism.
Or as George R.R. Martin would put it, there's some trick of the moonlight.
Some trick of the moonlight, yes.
Yep.
Which is another one that implies that the shadows cast from the moon, exactly.
For those of you who don't memorize the prologue of Game of Thrones, that's the first time you see the others. He glimpses a white shadow in the distance, and then he thinks it must just be some trick of the moonlight. And yeah, it's a white shadow and some trick of the moonlight.
It's a white shadow cast by a moon maiden, and perhaps by the moon pale trees. Yeah, exactly. So it's layers of ice and fire. And so basically that's when you see the others and dragons as ice and fire children that are parallel, it makes you think, well, maybe there's an ice and a fire moon. And again, the moon maidens follow the same pattern. So we've got ice and fire monster children, ice and fire moon maidens, ice and fire moon places as well, which is what I want to talk about next, because I think that's going to lead to some interesting stuff. And so, yeah, this works potentially pretty well as an explanation for the seasons, because you could imagine if we have ice and fire moons that are magically tied to the planet, maybe that's what governs the seasons.
I firmly believe that it is. Like, it's the cycle of the seasons and the tree. Yeah. And yeah, it's George has specifically said it's a magical thing. Like, so yeah, I think this just is the main magical thing that tracks incredibly well. Like, it's a natural cycle that has been thrown off by ancient magic. There's tons of hints to that. Like, something was done to the moon when dragons were born. The dragons being born was a magical act that was done by humans. So, like, at the very, very least, we know that someone was at least corrupting one of the moons, not even to mention all the Weirwood stuff. So it's like, that cycle's been thrown off. The first blurb of a Game of Thrones ever was like, some preternatural ancient event threw off the cycle of the seasons. That's the event he's probably talking about, or a series of events, you know, that are all basically the same thing, corrupting of the natural cycle to do incredible magic to either take power or avoid death or whatever people love to do with power.
So you keep talking about shadow magic and stuff, and for the people who've watched your video, they know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But let's explain how we think about these two moons and why we think about them this way. Okay. So the legend, first of all, the legend says, the Carthian legend, that this one moon kissed the sun, drank the fire of the sun, and gave birth to these fiery dragons. But then at the very end, it says, one day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and the dragons will return. So this is, first of all, a giveaway about the end of Ice and Fire. This is telling you how the next long night is going to come. It's literally a prophecy that something's going to happen to the remaining moon, and that the meteor dragons will return, which means the long night will return. This is also prophesied in ancient books of Ashai, where it is written that when the stars bleed, plural, and the cold breath of darkness falls on the world, because the bleeding stars have blotted out the sun, that's when Azor Ahai will be reborn again. And so we have this prophecy about the other moon. But of course, with George, the way he uses other as a double entendre, this got me thinking, well, maybe the other moon is the ice moon, and the one that gave us fiery dragons is the fire moon, right?
Right. That's definitely possible. Yeah. I do question, like, because in my picture of the long night, I do picture that icy moon as the only thing in the sky. I almost pictured the two moons blotting out the sun, literally like eclipse style, but just hanging there. Because if the shadows that are the others are cast from the moon, I'm like, well, the moon should probably remain up in the sky to cast them. And that kind of explains why Tormund says they don't come out during the day. They only come out at night. If they're cast from the moon, they might need the moon to be like casting its light down for them to take their form. So yeah, it could, like, even without the new destruction entirely of the moon, it could slam down moon meteors to blot out the sun, or the two moons could be hanging up there, you know, in some magically weird eclipse style or whatever, right? This is kind of where I'm like, our theories run in tandem.
I'm trying to catch up to you, Michael, but you keep getting so far ahead. I've got a Serwyn of the Mirror Shield three-way alignment thing for you. Like, I've got that for you.
Okay.
I just want to explain to people why we think the one moon is broken and the other one hasn't been broken yet.
Okay. I think it was, both of them have probably been used for terrible corrupting magic. The one has been covered in shadow. The other one has probably like been tied to these corrupted dead weirwood trees. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be as damaged. I don't know why that exactly is.
It's because it didn't get hit by a big comet yet.
Yeah, that too. Like, that's basically the magic that they did to the one moon was just more damaging or differently damaging, probably, when they needed to make dragons.
So this is
Go ahead. Sorry.
One of the main things that I am excited to give you is something that I picked up on, a repeating visual symbolism called the dragon locked in ice. And I told you about it a little bit last night. Basically, what we see is that inside of all of the places and people that represent ice moons, we find this little bit of fire. And you compared it to the yin yang, that's exactly right. On the white side, there's a black dot and vice versa. So let me just go through this a little bit here. What we've got is two sets of locations. And if the fire moon got hit by a comet and gave birth to dragons, then places that symbolize the fire moon should be smashed up and blackened things that used to be a home of dragons. Okay, so
Yeah.
Dragonstone is not smashed up yet, but it's a volcano.
Could be.
So that could happen
Yeah.
at any time. There was the storm on when Danny was born that tore the gargoyles off the parapets and stuff. But it's a big volcano. It's a home of dragons. It's definitely blackened. It's got all the black stone. And there are stone dragons. All like literally the whole castle is stone dragons. So if it were to explode, there would be pieces of flaming stone that would be dragons. So this is a perfect image of the moon where it explodes and the moon rocks are like flaming dragons. Now, Valeria is exploded. It's a former home of dragons. The dragon pit. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you do got to wonder if Dragonstone is going to blow at some point. Like, if you put a big volcano in your story, do you not blow it up? I don't know. So,
I've wondered if we're going to get the Eerie avalanche and the dragons. Like, is everything, when the meteor hits, like the wall's going to fall and just everything's just, Ragnarok is going to break loose. We'll have to see how far it goes, but you see the pattern. Ashai is the original home of dragons. It's blackened and smashed up and haunted and destroyed. Summerhall. Not only is it a home of dragons, like literally the Targaryens built it as a retreat, they tried to hatch a bunch of eggs there and it blew up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing. There's flying bits of flaming dragonstone and flying bits of Targaryen body parts in this explosion. Okay?
Dragon souls everywhere.
Go ahead.
Dragon souls everywhere, just being thrown into the wind.
So then let's talk about the people really quick. When Dany wakes her dragons, she has to be burnt. She goes into the fire and is burnt. Melisandre to give birth to the shadow babies, which are her version of the moon meteors. They're black shadows that kill and bring darkness, just like the black meteors that blotted out the sun and killed a bunch of people. She has to basically burn herself. She's being burned from the inside and her humanity is being removed.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Lady Stoneheart. Kat's death is another moon death. Grisly and awful and horrible. So it's a repeating pattern and it matches the myth about and Catelyn's dragons, by the way, are Barrack's men. She takes over Barrack's band. They're a bunch of R'hllor worshippers. So those are her dragons. Sometimes it's more tangential, but yes. So the Ice Moon, you want to pipe in?
I was going to say, interesting comment there. Will the second long night occur when the Night King Jon gives his stabs and gives his seed and soul to the Red Moon Melisandre? It's like, that's kind of an interesting, like, another connection there. If Jon and Mel are at the Night Fort doing shadow magic that is the same dynamic we're talking about here, the ice and fire stabbing each other, basically.
I would say yes. I see some part of Jon's resurrection timed to the new moon disaster. I just don't know if it's going to be when the others steal his body. Trademark, Jon's body will be stolen by the others. David Lightbringer video, check it out. Or if it'll be when his body is stolen back. Because all of the stuff about the moon, which I believe was the topic today, Jon's entire wolf dream about the moon seems to be promising a snow avalanche that's going to come from the moon as Jon wakes up.
Okay, well, a snow avalanche coming from the moon as Jon wakes up does sound a heck of a lot like him casting a bunch of icy moon shadows as soon as he wakes up. So that's what I think's going to happen. I think he and Mel are going to head to the Night Fort, but
I heard you talk about that. I think that Jon's going to be stolen by the others. So I don't know that he's going to make new others. But that was an interesting idea I had not pondered. Jon making new others.
Yeah, it's just so, like, Melisandre specifically thinks her magic that she thinks will be more powerful is the power to cast shadows. And she also has the, like, draft that wasn't published where she says, no, we have to go to the Night Fort. The Night Fort is the heart of your wall. And then she straight up tells Jon, like, hey, you need to take the power within you. if you don't use whatever power is available to you, it's going to come back to bite you. And he resists that, and it comes back to bite him. And she offers to show him how to use that power by making shadow babies with her. So if John's resurrected by weirwood magic and he goes and starts making shadow babies with Mel at the Night Fort, that's just potentially exactly Night King thing. So like I kind of feel like he might just do that. But that's my recent like tangent. I've got a whole video I'm working on like, does this work? Like how well would it work? I'm going to try and do a big deep dive on.
I think John is the shadow baby that Mel's going to cast. That's how I read that. But
okay.
Similar, he's going to be leading in my version of it, he's leading the others. So it gets
I think
gets
he
around
is,
to the
but
same.
he's leading I think he's leading the others that he casts. This is back to like looking them at more as like dragons that can be cast by anyone. So I think like there could be multiple factions of others, and I do think John's going to lead a army of shadows that he might not even necessarily realize he's creating others until he's done it, like him and Mel, and then they're like, oh dang, we just sent some others to assassinate Ramsay Bolton. I guess we're the Night King and Night Queen now.
Well, that would be crazy. That's one I haven't heard. That's definitely original.
Yeah, that's kind of the lead in that that's the next thing I want to talk about is who casts these shadows if they are Green Seer shadow babies, and then who's going to cast them in the next books, because I think John is well set up to do so.
So let's go into this chapter here and read this passage. I'm curious to see what you make of this, all right? So this is a wolf dream. This is in Dance with Dragons. The white wolf raced through a black wood beneath a pale cliff as tall as the sky. The moon ran with him, slipping through a tangle of bare branches overhead across the starry sky. So you can see what's happening. The wolf is running through the trees, and the moon appears to be pacing him because it's just the visual effect of it. But the moon is slipping through the trees here. It's kind of interesting language, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, I know which passage this is now, and this is a super interesting one that as a whole in this passage, it really does feel like the moon is just being used as the satellite and the conduit for this magical communication between these wolves. Like, it's implied straight up that the reason wolves howl at the moon is because the moon works as this magical conduit in this way.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but the raven is talking through the moon. So that would suggest it as a conduit of some kind, wouldn't it? And birds frequently represent spirits, that are journeying from the spirit world and back. So that tracks, if you will. So Snow the moon murmured. The wolf made no answer. Snow crunched beneath his paws. The wind sighed through the trees. Far off, he could hear his pack mates calling to him like to like. So here we have this wolf telepathy going on. He can see Wild Rain lash down upon his black brother, that's Shaggy Dog, as he tore at the flesh of an enormous goat. Shout out enormous horny goats. Washing the blood from his side with a goat's long horn, singular, had raked him. In another place, his little sister lifted her head to sing to the moon. 100 small gray cousins, that's Nymeria and her pack. On and on and on. Snow the moon called down, cackling. The white wolf padded along the man trail beneath the icy cliff. The taste of blood was on his tongue, and his ears rang to the song of the 100 cousins. Once they had been 6. Okay, so look, this is interesting. I have observed that the dire wolves have, yes, almost, more or less, they have a telepathic communication that does not seem to depend on the weirwoods. They can communicate directly to each other. Maybe that's linked to the moon.
I think it is. I think that's George's toying with wolves howling at the moon because this wolfish magic goes through the moon. Yeah, that's what I took from this passage when I was looking into it recently. Yeah,
and even the dead wolf mother is another moon maiden. Like, she has a bunch of fiery hellhound children. She has 6 children. They all have eyes of fire. So then that's referenced here. Once they had been 6, blah, 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 blah. Nipples, hard dead nipples. All right. So Snow the moon insisted. The white wolf ran from it. George never misses a chance.
Yeah.
Racing toward the cave of night where the sun had hidden his breath frosting in the air. That's another classic mythology. Like the sun goes over the earth and then goes under the earth into the cave and comes back up. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah. So that just means he's running west, right? That's just poetically being like, is that right? He's just running to the west again along the wall. Then.
On starless nights, the great cliff was black as stone, a darkness towering high above the wide world. But when the moon came out, it shimmered pale and icy as a frozen stream.
Because it's the ice moon.
And I like the moon came out on starless nights. And it's like, okay, so the wall is symbolizing the moon here. And on the nights when you can't see the stars, that's during the long night, the smoke would have been covering the earth. So you wouldn't have seen anything, really. And so, yeah, that would be a starless night. The moon was black as stone. So that's your first moon that is dark stone associated with black stone. It may be invisible. But when the moon came out, it shimmered pale and icy in as a frozen stream. So the wolf's pelt was thick and shaggy, but when the wind blew, blah, blah, blah. On the other side, the wind was colder still. Snow, an icicle tumbled from a branch. The white wolf turned and bared his teeth. Snow, his fur bristled as the woods dissolved around him. Snow, snow, snow. He heard the beat of wings. So the tree is attacking here with the icicle. Those are the icy teeth of the trees. And then right afterwards, the raven attacks. So you can sort of see it all as being copacetic there. And then this is the capstone. The raven is getting more upset about the snow, then lands on John's chest with a thump and screams into his face. And that's as he's awakening.
Right.
So it's like...
And that... Yeah, the fact that the communication that's implied to be magical and coming from a green seer, because it's the raven talking to him, in his dream, it is the moon. I think that's George hinting that the magical source behind this thing on the astral plane is the moon. That's how I read this whole passage.
It's pretty straightforward, to be honest. It's not really that cryptic of a reading, as they say.
Well, if you want to get cryptic, I do like that you brought up how the tree seems to just chuck an icicle at Ghost, like at John, I guess, technically. Because that is another example of a tree seemingly intentionally or magically or incredibly weirdly timed, at the very least, chucking snow off its branch at someone. Right outside of Bloodraven's cave, Bran is buried in a tree dropping snow off of its branches to save him from being attacked until the children can come rescue him. So, like, there's magic where trees throw ice off their branches or snow off their branches, and if the wall is a big line of trees with ice on their branches, that magic might be the same magic in the Horn of Jormungand. I don't know. That's my whole little other connection of the trees throwing icicles at people and dropping snow on people.
Well, all you have to do is think about the tree as the cosmic world tree. If it's the cosmic world tree, then what are the icicles that are falling from its branches? Those are icy moon meteors.
Icy moon meteors, that tracks. Yeah.
And that's what's happening in this scene, is that the moon is promising snow and then turning into a raven that lands on John's chest. And then it gets worse because it says, "Snow," it screamed in his face, "I hear you." Then, let's see, John wriggled an arm out from under his blankets to shoo the raven off. He filled his fist with a pillow and let fly, but the bird took to the air. The pillow struck the wall and burst, scattering stuffing everywhere. And then it talks about a flurry of feathers. So most feathers are either going to be white or gray. And usually we're going to think of a white pillow and white feathers. So there's a flurry, meaning a snowstorm, of white feathers. But what does this pillow represent? It's a big white thing that he threw at the wall. So that's the moon being thrown at the wall of Westeros. And then there's a big snowstorm.
That does track really well too. Like, so if you imagine these two paragraphs are like a picture of winter. It's like the bird is screaming snow, 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 because it's just constantly snowing. Then the icicle is thrown. Then there's a lot more snow. And then at the end, I mean, I don't know how deeply you read into this, but John does something, and then the bird starts talking about corn, which is Bran. So after the winter is done, the feathers fly everywhere, the snow is all flying around, the time for corn comes. And that could just be George literally also being like, hey, winter's coming, icy moon meteor, maybe, snow, 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 corn. That, you know, that tracks.
Well, so right afterwards, it's roast raven, John suggested. So the raven is the meteor. A roast raven would be a burnt black meteor. So they're talking about corn, meaning seed, and then we've got a black meteor, star seed.
So roast raven also, though, if in that long night all the old gods die, there will be roast raven in theory. If that old Weirwood hive mind dies in that process that was just talked about or maybe hinted at in those paragraphs before, yeah, roast raven could imply that maybe the old green seers are dead. I don't know. If
I do think there needs to be a cleansing, possibly by fire, of the Weirwood net. That's very possible.
If George is doing that weird hinting at the whole long night thing, like with these paragraphs, that would track kind of well.
So let's talk about the ice moon places, because I think this is really going to show you what I'm talking about as far as the nature of the ice moon. So we've seen that there's a very good consistency with the fire moon locations. The dragon pit in particular is the one I want to hone in on. It's the best one because it has a dome. And not only does it have a dome that's made of stone, like the moon, it's broken when Dreamfire is a great name for a dragon, flies up and smacks her head on the roof, and cracks it. So it's just like a dragon trying to be born out of an egg and cracking its head out of the egg. Then it wears a crown of fire. So there's shout out to like the birth of Azor Ahai as this fiery demon god from the destruction of the moon. And even the Ring of Fire is an eclipse reference too, because the Ring of Fire eclipse is of course the name for when it's the perfect and you get the ring around the side. So it's a really good it's the best, really. It's the best moon cracking metaphor around. And King's Landing is actually an astronomical map of the moons and the sun. So the Red Keep, where the king lives, represents the sun. Okay. Then we have these two hills, the Hill of Visenya and the Hill of Rhaenys. Now, Rhaenys is our fire moon queen. She dies in Dorne in a fiery death at the Hellholt that perfectly mimics the moon being shot out of the sky by a comet when her dragon is shot out of the sky by the scorpion. And then Visenya, she goes and conquers the Vale, which is an icy place and has a bunch of ice symbolism. So let's move over to Visenya's Hill and talk about Visenya's Hill. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, too, if the Red Keep is in the middle of the two moons, it might also represent the Earth, right? Like, it could represent the Earth with the two moons around it. And I don't know if you have looked into this line, but something I noticed just really recently, when Arya sees Illyrio and Varys in the Red Keep, she sees them in this big well with stairs built into it, going down and down and down, and they're walking down, talking, and then they push a button and the well top closes, like by a trick of the stonework. So
yes, the Red Keep is like a Weirwood tree also. Yes, the Weirwood is a Red Keep. It's a bloody house that you live in. Yeah.
Yeah, she thinks that the well reminds her of the portal or the steps to hell that old Nan used to tell them about. So I think that old Nan told them a story about the Black Gate stairway, and that's what she's vaguely remembering. And Bran, for whatever reason, didn't remember it when he was at the Night Fort.
But
Arya seems to remember the Black Gate stairwell is described the same way, and she sees this stairwell, and she's like, oh, this is like old Nan told us about the gate to hell. Like,
well, it's the same symbol. Serpentine steps.
That's all I was pointing out.
Same symbol.
So, like,
the Serpentine steps are also at the Red Keep.
That was I just randomly thought of that connection.
Yeah, it crowns Aegon's High Hill just like the Weirwoods are crowned with a head of red leaves. Absolutely. Right. There's also the Street of Sisters that runs straight as an arrow between the two hills.
Okay.
And that's very important because I keep telling you, when the fire moon exploded, a piece of it went into the ice moon. And that is why the ice moon always has this little speck of a black dragony stone-like meteor thing inside of it. So let me go with Visenya's Hill for a second. Visenya's Hill, okay. She is the most ice-associated dragon person, like, in the story. Her dragon is called Vagar. Vagar is named after Vega, which is a blue star in the northern part of the sky that was once the pole star about 10,000 years ago. So when we talk about the blue pole star is the eye of the ice dragon, he's literally talking about Vega, probably, since he named Vagar, who is Vagar's colors are like blue and green, I believe we found out.
Okay.
So she rides Vagar, the ice dragon. Vega is in Lyra, the constellation Lyra. Okay, now Lyra is basically it's a lyre, which is a harp. And who did Rhaegar play his harp for? Lyanna, who's named after the Lyannan She, as you pointed out in your video. She's a Night's Queen figure named after the Night's Queen of the She. Okay, so that's where this whole idea of Rhaegar playing his harp for Lyanna, the icy queen, like, that's just all astronomy from the northern sky. That's Lyra and Vega and Draco and all that stuff. So Visenya is riding Vagar. Her hill is surmounted with a snowy white marble temple, the Sept of Baelor. Okay. And out of the Sept of Baelor come the warrior sons, who are coded as others. They wear mirror-like armor. They have their sigil as a crystal sword in the darkness. The others have ice crystal swords in the darkness, and their ice armor is like mirrors. So
that
better,
tracks incredibly well, yeah. With the others coming from the moon, that's just perfect, yeah.
And then the Kingsguard just double that symbolism. They don't live on Visenya's Hill, but they were created by Visenya. And they were created with the blood of Aegon. She cut Aegon with her sword and was like, you need the Kingsguard. So in that symbolic, magical way, his cheek, right. She drew blood, so she took Night's King's seed and soul and made the others, made the Kingsguard.
The Moon Queen gave him a Weirwood scar, and all of a sudden, he's got Kingsguard all around him. He's got others around him after she gave him the Weirwood face.
That's a great point. Yeah, that would be like a face carving. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Visenya is a mother of the others many times over, riding an ice dragon with and remember, snowy white marble, that's another ice symbol. So she has an ice temple on her hill with others coming out of it. It's all and all the Faith of the Seven is ice coated, everything about it. Mm-hmm. So, and then the other hill, again, the Hill of Rhaenys has the dragon pit, which is this fantastic model of the ice moon. I mean, of the fire moon. Excuse me.
Right.
You knew what I meant. So
I know it. Yeah.
So the other ice moon locations, just to list them real quick: the Wall, Winterfell, the Eyrie, the White Sword Tower where the Kingsguard live, Temple of the Moonsingers, White Harbor. They're all similar, and like I said, they all have a piece of captive fire moon inside them. So the White Sword Tower is the easiest one. That's where the others Kingsguard come from. And when we go up to the Lord Commander's chamber, everything is white, including the white Weirwood shield, except for the black oak chair the Lord Commander sits in. And Jaime reaches under his black oak chair, black wood chair, and pulls out a black sword, which is Widow's Wail, and gives it to Brienne. So there's this, like, the black dragon sword. That couldn't be any more clear of a symbol of the fire moon meteor. And it's in the middle of the home of the others. Okay?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, Mellet the Nightfort in the next book is going to be that too. She's just this fiery figure in the dead center of the realm of all this icy magic. And she feels way more powerful than she did even back when she was amongst the fiery side. It all just is. It really is everywhere.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. The wall, if you just want to look at the wall in general, it's a big ice moon symbol, but embedded within it are these little black stones of the castles. Castle Black.
Yeah, I thought about that too. And the Night Fort and Castle Black are just, I thought about that last night after we had talked about, we brought up this like connection.
And so, you've been, it goes on and on. Winterfell has hints about dragons sleeping underneath of it, and it has Jon Snow, the frozen dragon. The Eyrie is a god's wood without gods. But then Sansa, a fiery red-headed moon maiden who's turned into a stone, goes and lives there. We could talk about Sansa more in a minute. White Harbor has the Black Stone Wolf's Den. And so Visenya's Hill. Where's the captive fire moon inside of Visenya's Hill? See if you can think of it.
I don't know. Is it... Yeah, I don't know.
Cersei.
Oh. Okay, I mean she's red. Are you going Mad King's child, Cersei? Or not?
Oh, she doesn't have to be Mad Queen's child. She's just a lioness. She's mostly fire associated, except for when we're given the Ice Queen foreshadowings, because she's one of those Nissa Nissas that turns into a Night's Queen. So she's got eyes of wildfire, but when she gets imprisoned in the Sept of Baelor, they cut her hair. They cut her golden hair off.
She's definitely got the fire symbolism too, especially considering the show where she does the whole wildfire thing, and then if she does team up with Euron, like in the show, isn't there a vision where Aeron or someone sees Euron standing with a woman with flames in her hands or something? That implies Cersei's going to be using wildfire more than just Blackwater.
Maybe, but she has eyes of wildfire for sure.
Many ifs before we get to Cersei teaming up with Euron, but if that did happen,
that's why I'm saying Euron aside, George gives her eyes of wildfire, so she's going to do something with wildfire. It probably will be blowing up the Sept of Baelor, in my opinion. Because that would track with the promise that the other moon will kiss the sun too and crack and birth dragons, right?
Yeah. No, like she's gonna blow something up. The Sept of Baelor really does make a lot of sense.
And furthermore, the wildfire caches that are under the Sept of Baelor is the same symbol. It's the little speck of fire that is waiting to hatch out. So Winterfell, Jon is the hidden dragon. He's going to wake. He's going to be reborn. He's going to come into his dragon identity. Okay. Winterfell's already been burned. And then George gave us the symbolic dragon hatching out. The Eyrie could have a disaster coming, getting back to like, will George ruin the Eyrie and stuff? So basically what I want to give to you, and the chat's accusing me of lecturing you on your own theories or my own theories or something. I'm trying to present this to you so you can tell me what you think it means. And the idea here, guys, again, if you got two moons and one blows up or gets, hit and pieces of it blow off, some of those moon chunks are going to hit the other moon. And it seems like that's what we've got. All the ice moon places have this black fire moon symbol inside of it. So... How is that shaping the moon magic as you see it?
So I do think, that tracks incredibly well. If there's moon meteors hitting the Earth in large number, at least a number of them are going to land on the other moon. That just only makes sense. I do think it definitely does hint at the yin-yang like combination of the two. And given what Melisandre says about how she feels more powerful at the wall, I'm starting to think that like yin yang makes you more powerful. Like if you are the fire surrounded by all the ice, you're more powerful than if you're the fire surrounded by all the fire. So like it could have been just a part of the magically powering up the magic of the moons that they needed to crack them and mix them and intermingle the magic in this yin yang type of way to make all of it more usable and more powerful, but at the same time, maybe that mix has been what's thrown off the seasons. That it could be something like that.
So let me throw this at you. The others are like frozen fire. They are like fire magic turned cold. We see it in their eyes. They're cold, burning stars, and nothing burns like the cold. He keeps saying it. So it's like the others are like fire demons that are flipped to ice, because usually they say fire consumes and ice preserves. Well, the others do. They are eternal, but they kill and consume. They want to destroy things.
Yeah.
So they are consuming like fire. And so this is what I think, there's a consistency here with the others having this little bit of fire magic that's been frozen. This is Night's King and Queen. If Night's King is Azor... You see what
I was going to say, I bet it is on some level, like, to access the magic, you needed to combine the two. And maybe, like, the need, like, that's why they broke up the one moon. It slamming into the earth and slamming into the other moon may have been the thing that, like, allowed the two magics to mix on some level and become, like, usable in that way. Because, if you couldn't cast a shadow with it, like, that could work. I do also.
Well, hold on, you're skipping ahead 3 steps here.
I am. I do that.
Let me just give you. I'm trying to ask you about I'm trying to show you a pattern. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that if Night's King is Azor Ahai, he starts off as a fiery person. Mm-hmm. He kills Nissa Nissa. He goes into the Weirwood net. He becomes Night's King. Night's King is like the undead version or spirit version of Azor Ahai. When we're told that Night's Queen takes the seed and soul of Night's King to make the others, essentially, that I think that is the act of Azor Ahai's transformation. He's having his fire drained from him, just as Mel is pulling from Stannis's life fires to make shadows. Night's Queen is taking this fire dragon, pulling his fire and turning it into ice and making the others who are like frozen fire. That matches with the moon thing that I'm saying, where you've got a piece of fire moon lodged in the ice moon. Think about that little black stone as like Night's King or Night's King's seed, and it's been frozen. So that's why Jon is like an ice dragon, and we see all this ice dragon frozen fire stuff on the icy side.
And if Jon is set up to be the next Night King and he has the Targaryen bloodline, and that might be why it's important that he does, like, for some reason, that could track that, like, my biggest, like, I think disagreement is I'm not entirely, like, I don't necessarily entirely believe Azor Ahai was the Night's King. I tend to think the Night's King was a different figure than the last hero. I think the last hero was the Westerosi version of Azor Ahai. I kind of think that like, in the way that there may have been different corruptions of the moons at different times, and there seems to be different long night type events, like whatever the 5 forts are keeping away are lizard-like. So they seem to have been created by some other corruption of some powerful magic. So I think Azor Ahai may have lifted a long night type thing somewhere else. The Night King might be doing some long night type stuff. So that's where my, like, main like, of what you said there, that was...
It's not important whether they're the same people. But what's important is that Night's King seems to have had fire that was drained from him. That's the idea.
I do agree. That is the thing that, like, the Azor Ahai thing aside, I do think you're on to something truly with, like, the yin-yang of ice and fire, and then Jon needs to have a bit of fire in him. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe the Night King did as well, like, thinking about it this way. That tracks pretty well. I don't know who the Night King was, if there's any hint that he was a Stark who... I assume he was a Stark, but I don't know if there is a hint that he was a Stark who had specifically, like, been the son of some fiery princess. You know, like, maybe there was actually something that's yet to be revealed that will say he was ice and fire in a similar way to Jon. I don't know. But yeah, Jon, in my opinion, does feel really well set up to be the next Night King. So him being, you know, intentionally, it seems like the timeline was manipulated to have him be a fire ice mixture and end up where he ended up. Like, it could definitely be important, and probably is.
Yeah, and so it's just basically, there's this repeat, there's like as above, so below. So whatever's happening on the ground is kind of like the easier way to figure out what's happening in the sky. We're kind of doing it backwards because we have a lot more information on the characters and the places. So we're sort of extrapolating from that. That's what I did. I was like, if you look at all these Ice Moon places, there's this black stone in the middle of it. So in the heart of winter,
Right.
there's probably a black stone. Are you hip to that one?
I think that could definitely work. I tend to think the Heart of Winter is either the heart tree at the Night Fort, or is Winterfell, or like third place for me is that it's somewhere beyond the wall that we have yet to go to, because I think the conflict collapses very nicely around the Night Fort and Winterfell. It does
I
not
agree. Yeah.
collapse nicely around anywhere north of the wall. So I think the Heart of Winter is Winterfell. Is the black stone deep down there, like, is Bran the Builder also tied to a glass candle, or like whatever obsidian they shoved through the Night King chest? That's the black, like, that is the same thing, right? The Night King in the show, he's weirwood coated, children of the forest, he's stretched up there, but they put a black fire magic instrument through his chest. And Marika the Eternal in Elden Ring is strapped up to the big magical world tree in the same way, and there's an obsidian looking sword through her chest eternally. So, like, it's there. I don't know what to do with it beyond yin and yang, and beyond the fact that Melisandre is going to be probably casting some others at the Night Fort as her little fire yin yang in the big ice circle. But I don't know. I don't know if there's. I'll have to think about it beyond that. I think it's really interesting. It's definitely there.
So what I think we have, as far as like trying to figure out the state of the moons, and I'm trying to sketch this out as a picture, like the fire moon is fallen and it's on the earth. The ice moon is up in the sky, but it's essentially haunted. So Serwyn of the Mirror Shield this is where I bring him up, and let me pull the actual text so that I get this right. Serwyn of the Mirror Shield saved Princess Dorissa from giants. That's not. I'm talking about the dragon Arax when he slew the dragon. That's the one. Well, Hugo, he'll answer me this. How did Serwyn of the Mirror Shield slay the dragon Urax? Not Arax, Urax. He approached behind his shield. Urax saw only his reflection until Serwyn had plunged his spear through his eye. So, Serwyn of the Mirror Shield is supposed to be like a Kingsguard out of time, right? That's the thing about him. It's like, oh, well, the knights didn't exist back then. But he essentially is symbolizing the ice moon in this astronomy template. And he has a mirror shield. So the mirror shield could just be the surface of the ice moon, or it could be describing the two moons, where the ice moon is using the other moon as a shield. The approach of the dragon Urax would be the comet. Okay, so the comet is coming at the moon, and it sees its reflection. So it's like this dragon reflection, and then the ice moon essentially throws a spear at the dragon. Okay, so that would essentially be like the dragon becomes like the eclipse alignment, I guess you could say. Like the God's eye that you see in the sky is the moon's in front of the sun. That's essentially what gets poked in the eye. So that's the eye poking. So it's like all these things are lining up. Serwyn, his mirror shield, the dragon, his own reflection, and then it's like they're coming. There's this big impact. The eye of the dragon gets put out, and then it says Serwyn of the Mirror Shield is haunted by the souls of those he slew. And so this, I think, is talking about the idea that the ice moon now has a piece of this other dead moon inside of it.
That could work too. Yeah. Well, and I've thought about this too, with the language of the tree reaching up at the Night Fort to pull the moon down into the well. Like, that could just mean it's trying to channel the magic of the moon, and it's growing towards the moonlight because that's what gives it its energy. And it's like trying to pull that down to the face that's down in the well. But it could also be like, I've considered, like, could the darkened moon be dark because the other moon stole its light as well on some level? Like, if the weirwoods are color matched to moonlight, did they steal the moonlight from the moon that's currently missing it? Like, we have trees that glow with moonlight and weird sword that glows with moonlight. Those aren't normal. And one of the moons that should be glowing is not. That's not normal. Are those things related? did these magical artifacts that glow with moonlight literally steal that?
Yes. So that's the
moonlight?
same thing as me saying Night's Queen stole the fire of an Azor Ahai figure. And I don't make any, when I say Azor Ahai, I basically at this point, I mean somebody like him. It could be his line,
Coded
his
at
son, whatever. But yeah, took the fire dragon energy, transformed it into ice, and used that to create the others. So this is the same thing as Azor Ahai invading the Weirwood net, setting it on fire, and as a side effect, or a countermeasure, I'm not sure which, those Weirwood spirits are birthed into their icy bodies and become the others. So it's kind of like all just different versions of the same thing here. But the haunting is the part I wanted to key in on. Not only the alignments, but the idea that the ice moon is now haunted.
Yeah. It is like clearly the ghostly moon. Like there's these weird haunting ghostly shadows that glow with its light. So like it tracks to me calling the ice moon haunted just on that basis alone, that like the ghostly monsters we saw in the prologue come from it.
What is my favorite ice and fire symbolism? Oh man. Summertime.
Favorite. Ooh. I mean, that's an interesting question. Like my favorite theory, because like there's just a ton of them. Yeah, wow. I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily know that I have a favorite, because like there's just so many different categories of theory, right? Like R plus L equals J is incredibly interesting, and I think really well set up and stuff like that. And at one point it would have been my favorite theory, like when I first heard about it, but like so much of the time your favorite theory is the most exciting one you've heard recently that's still new, you know? Like, because like what's coming to mind is like, just real quick, while I was driving around, I caught a Quinn the GM video where he was talking about Summerhall and Rhaegar's sacrifice and all that stuff, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's really good. It's like, is that my favorite theory ever? No, but that's what comes to mind. I'm like, what's a good theory that I just heard? But it's just like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if your mind is doing the same thing when asked your favorite symbolism, because there's probably like 300 answers.
Yeah. So. My favorite new theory is that Marwyn is chewing weirwood leaves. That was yours. I love that one.
No, thank you.
So
yeah. Yeah, no, it like and the other thing that is weird too is like I don't have the time I used to read A Song of Ice and Fire theories. Before I made A Song of Ice and Fire theories, my free time would go to watching like David and random people talk about theories way more often, and now I'm like reading the books again and like picking out quotes all the time, and I'm like, I haven't had a chance to like look it up. But like, yeah, I don't know. Like there's tons of really interesting, really good stuff coming out. I think we're in a golden age of A Song of Ice and Fire theories. Like I really do, with Elden Ring, House of the Dragon. Like we've had long enough to sit on the books and enough other clues that like the people who are still going at it are getting closer, I think. Like we're zoning in on, we have higher quality theories across the board now, in my opinion.
So do you think Dawn is a piece of the Ice Moon?
That's interesting, because it's clearly channeling the magic, and like it could be a piece that has stolen some of the moonlight from the dark moon, or it could be a piece of the icy still glowing moon, and either one of those would track to me.
So let me make the case to you that all the magic swords are moon swords. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, the whole thing where the ice moon gets injected with this piece of fire moon seems to be like a heart transplant. It's like the ice moon has its heart ripped out and it gets a heart transplant. And we see this in the Vale, okay, with Sansa and Lysa. Lysa gets booted out the moon door, and Sansa's stone, or Lane's stone, I guess it would be. But she does a fire moon thing at King's Landing when she blots out the face of Solar King Joffrey. Then she turns into a stone, flies through the Godswood, down the ladder, and across the sea, which is three metaphors that are all the same thing. Across the Weirwood Net Sea, across the void, whatever. And then she lands in the Vale, which is an ice moon place. And she's landing there as Elaine's stone. and she's pushing out and replacing Lysa. Now, Peter's the one who actually pushed her out, but it's definitely a replacing. And they both sort of have this Night's Queen symbolism. So when Lysa gets pushed out of the moon door, that's like the original heart of the ice moon. So I just like, well, what happened to that heart of that moon? Well, it's like, well, that could be the Dawn meteor, because Dawn has all this ice symbolism, the milk glass, like the other's bones, alive with moonlight, alive with light, the walls alive with light.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. Yeah, because like it definitely feels connected, and that's an interesting way to explain it. That is the magic that powers it as some sort of heart of that moon. Yeah, because I mean, you need some really powerful magic to be whatever Dawn is. It seems to be a sword that can't really lose. So.
And it could have some sort of control over the others if it's from the ice moon, and the others are literally animated with some kind of moon magic, like you're saying.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting too. And it, like, I don't know if, because, like, the other interesting thing about this whole dynamic and reason that I like to view it as two different shadow moons is because they seem to have power over each other. So that would, if Dawn comes from the ice moon, it would seem like maybe it is the world's best dragon slaying sword, if ever it was needed to be. Right. In the same way that obsidian, like, by even just a little poke, the other starts to smoke when it grabs the obsidian. Like,
it can't even touch
it. It's point of contact when you are powered by the opposite moon. That's why they were crafting weirwood arrows when they thought they were going to have to fight the Targaryen dragons before the King Who Knelt did that. It would have probably worked if you land a weirwood arrow in a dragon just right. I bet you could probably kill it. Same way as the other gets killed by obsidian hitting it, even though against a normal sword, it's going to win all day.
And then for the black swords, the Valyrian swords, they obviously symbolize moon meteors. That's easy. But there is some missing ingredient or process, part of the process, that nobody else knows about, that was lost with Valyria. We can rework Valyrian steel, and the cohoric smiths do that with blood magic, but they can't make new Valyrian steel for some reason. One of my theories about that is that it's because the Valyrians were getting all of their ore from Gagasos, which is right next to the oily blackstone toad idol. There's also Black Fortress on Gagasos, so there could be more oily black stone around there. There's some at Yin too. So it seems like Sithorios, it either took some meteor shrapnel or somebody moved it from Ashai to there. Probably the former, meteors land everywhere or whatever, cause different effects, different places. So if the Valyrians were going to Gagasos, which we know they were doing a long time ago, like 5,000 years ago, they may have been harvesting the oily black stone meteorite there to make weapons. And this is what ancient peoples did. The first iron ore we ever made weapons from was meteorite ore, because it's already sort of forged. And so it could be that all the Valyrian steel swords are oily black stone, and that is why they appear to drink the light just as the oily black stone does. Same language used for both Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper and the Stone of Ashai, drinking the sunlight. So those could all be moon swords too.
And that being powered by the magic of that moon that drinks in the light makes them the perfect weapon to kill the others, which is exactly what we see. So yeah, and there are many ways that you can connect the magic back to the moon. It's, in my opinion, either exactly what you said about there being some special ore that they had in Valyria, because it's the fantasy version of Damascus steel, and that's just like what Damascus steel ended up being, is they just had a slightly different type of ore that they had access to compared to everyone else. Or the other reason that maybe they can't make it now is because it involved dragons in the process. Either the dragons or the ore probably come from that darkened moon that drinks in the light. And in either case, that probably means they do have moon magic behind them. And it's the fiery moon, which makes them good at killing ice moon cast shadows, which are the others. It just tracks so well.
Like I said, I'm trying... My goal in trying to perhaps overly tediously try to lay some of these things out is to give you these things so that you can cook with them. Because I know you you are putting together some of this stuff literally more than I have. So I'm sort of like scratching my head and going, well, I remember I had noticed this pattern called the Dragon Locked in Ice, but I stopped talking about it because people got tired of hearing me say it. Dragon Locked in Ice.
The difference between you and me is you had a YouTube channel years ago, because I hit all these dead ends for like 5 years with all these theories. And I'm like, oh, season 8 is going to at least give me enough to piece these together. And then it didn't touch the magic at all. I'm like, dang it. And I went away for like a year, and then I came back and started like piecing it together. And it took a long time of just noticing these things, staring at them for like a year, and eventually something else clicks, or you hear, like there were times where I heard you talk about something and you weren't saying the same thing as I was, but you would talk about the same thing, and you would raise the question of like, yeah, why is this always symbolized? Like, you're like, there's all this weird like symbolism of the others being trapped somewhere. And I'm like, probably has to do with the bodies that I think are in the wall. And I heard you mention that at the exact right time to be like,
right.
Oh yeah, I bet like that is probably what that is hinting at. So like, yeah, there are many times where like just by riffing on the exact same things, it does just generates interesting ways of thinking about all this stuff that a lot of times, yeah, it helps to do that, over the course of years. That's why I was saying we're in like a golden age of theories, is because people have been talking about them for a decade now. And even if we weren't there like a decade ago, like we were noticing the right things in most cases, right? Like the Jon Snow as the Night King theory was one of the oldest things that I remember people talking about. But in my video, I put up the underpants gnome graphic, because it's right. Step 1, steal underpants, question mark, profit. It's like, Jon Snow's going to go to the Night Fort, maybe, question mark, Night King? And now it's like, oh, well, maybe if he's casting shadows at the Night Fort with a shadow binder, which Melisandre literally suggested that they should do, if that's what the Night King was doing, then there you go. So it's like, we're honing in on things, I think, the more.
Right, and then my answer, I was in the same situation where I was like, well, he's got all this Night King symbolism. And then it occurred to me, it's like, oh, wait, they're going to steal his body. That's my answer. They're going to steal his body while his spirit is in Ghost. So it won't even, when you talk about Jon going against Bran and being like potentially rehabilitated, what I see there is Bran helping to free Jon's body from otherish enchantment. But that's not actually Jon. Like, Jon's going to be in Ghost. His bot, everyone will think it's Jon because they'll see him otherized leading the others, and it's definitely going to take Bran to help free him from that. Probably Bran and Mel, and that's when the fiery thing happens. That could be at Winterfell or the Night Fort or the Grove of Nine. Any of that could work.
Yeah. That would be interesting too. Like if the others took over Jon. The one part I do kind of like about it being Jon is George has so perfectly like set up the path for Jon to embrace the casting the shadow intentionally now. And like, we know, like, if the others are shadows cast from the Night Fort by someone animated with Weirwood magic, we know that Jon going there casting a shadow while he's animated with Weirwood magic is gonna be a bad news bears situation. But he has followed a perfectly logical path, and he's been trying to do the right thing the whole time, and he's been offered this power, and he's like, no, I'm resisting the power. I don't need that. I'm going to do the right thing, and people will follow me. And then they all stab him. And then he's just like, well, all right, I'm back from the dead now. I'm going to take that power that I didn't take last time. That's a logical, reasonable choice for him to make. And suddenly he has logically, reasonably, like step by step walked himself into being the next Night King intentionally while still trying to do the right thing. And that just feels so very George R.R. Martin, because like he's like Dany. Dany is gonna walk herself into taking Westeros with fire and blood because she's been trying to do the right thing the whole time.
I don't think either one of those things is going to happen. I don't think Dany's going to go that far in becoming like evil or anything, and I think that she'll be walking away from that brink. There's not even time for her to destroy Westeros. Like, she's going to get to Westeros, and the Long Night's already going to need to be falling and stuff. And I don't think Jon will intentionally become that dark. But I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna sometimes. I'm definitely accused of wanting, like, I don't think Bloodraven's evil, and, so.
Yeah.
You know.
I tend to not think he's evil either, but
Well,
yeah,
that's nice.
yeah,
I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna. I will admit that. Okay, so let's talk about the wall for a second and Nissa Nissa. Okay, dawn really is the uniting thing here. We're talking about the idea of spirits moving between the moons and the earth and the comet and all that. So when Azor Ahai stabs Nissa Nissa, it says that her soul and her strength and spirit went into the blade. So there is a transference there. So if we go up to the sky, what that means is that the moon meteors that came from the moon have the spirit and soul of the moon in them. Because that's the flaming sword that comes out of the moon's chest and is like, aha, Lightbringer. Those are the moon meteors that are lighting up the sky. And so that now has, or alternately, you could see that as the comet that's like
that's
the
what I was
remnant of
just
the
going to
comet.
say. The flaming sword that hit the dark moon and now is flaming, while the dark moon is now darkened. Like maybe the red comet stole all the light from the moon, and that's why it's so bright. Is it just took all the light into this little comet?
So
Who knows?
the surviving comet and the meteor children are like twins. They're all the same.
Yeah.
It's very hard to tell them apart in the metaphors. I've run into that many times.
Right.
They're basically the same thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my point is that the language of the Azor Ahai myth shows spirit and soul transference, and so you could project that onto the heavenly bodies and say that whatever came to Earth brought spirits or souls or something with him. So that's more evidence for your theory. And then if you look at the wall, which is this symbol, the parallel symbol to dawn, it's described as being straight as a sword on one side and curvy as a snake on the other side. So it's a snake sword. It's alive with light. It's made of ice crystal. So it looks a lot like an other sword or like dawn, but it's also an ice dragon. It's described as an ice dragon a bunch of times. So if there's an ice dragon like sleeping in the wall, what does that suggest? Like it's going to wake, it's going to explode, it's going to hatch. And again, one day the other moon will kiss the sun too and the dragons will return. It's kind of all...
Yeah. And I mean, given the description of how gigantic those ice dragons were, like, I mean, I don't actually think this is the case, but if the wall broke up and it turns out there was a bunch of sleeping giant ice dragons in there as well as Weirwoods, it's like, well, I guess, like, it's not set up. Like, there's legends about these giant creatures made of pale ice. They could be frozen in the giant wall made of pale ice. But you never know. I don't think there are dragons actually physically in the wall. But I loved, this is the other thing that, like, we need to say as theorists. You need to entertain these ideas that you don't necessarily believe and follow them through to their end to figure out if they're good or not. That's the only way to figure it out. So, like, that's why I always entertain, like, random stuff. If you hear me go on a tangent, I don't necessarily believe that thing. I'm following it out to its logical end to see, like, where you run into problems. Does this lead anywhere cool? You know, that's an important thing to do.
Well, that's why I was interested in your theory about the that the others are tied to these original green seers that are like hooked up under to trees under the wall. It's because like the others look like pieces of the wall, especially when you think about it in moon terminology. The wall is like the moon, the ice moon that the others come from. Like the wall is like Night's Queen. It's and that's so the others being pieces of ice, it's almost like they're carved off of the moon. You mentioned that one where Melisandre's talking about John's shadow being etched in moonlight on the wall. So this is another one where I'd say that is John. That's Night King John. That's him as a shadow form, etched in ice, in the moonlight. The moon has kissed him, just like, Night King kissed the moon. So I think we're pretty close on how we interpret that scene there in particular.
So the one thing I want to bring up with that, because this is a tangent that also got cut from my video, is if all this shadow life is coming from the moon and like you do magic casting shadows, that fits so perfectly well with how George uses shadow as a metaphor. Tyrion is the small man who casts a large shadow in the very beginning of the book. Jon, in that scene we just talked about, casting his shadow large along the wall. And Varys has his riddle about power being a trick, a shadow on a wall, but shadows can kill, which also mentions, by the way, that hints that Varys knows about shadow assassins, but because he says it doesn't make sense for him to say shadows can kill in most contexts, but in this world it does. And then he also talks about to Tyrion how a small man can cast a large shadow. And so George is constantly using the idea of casting or projecting your shadow as using your power or projecting your power, your influence into the world. And so now Jon, Melisandre's like, hey, cast your shadow. You're casting a large, powerful shadow. Take your power, put your influence out into the world. And he might literally do that by casting shadows.
That's a great example of that sort of thematic paralleling of the magic and the conflicts of the heart that I was talking about. That's good. Yep. That is, because that is how it's used as far as like, oh, Tyrion has a large shadow, like a big influence on the world.
Yep. Yeah. And so if magically the way that these old green seers are influencing the world to this day is that they cast an army of shadows that forces everyone to follow the old ways, because if you don't follow the old ways and you don't feed enough blood to those trees, the magical ward of the wall stops working and those shadows come back and kill you. So they are controlling the world, projecting their power and influence by casting a large army of shadows.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm curious about, like I said, there's some tangential stuff about Jon Snow and the Night Fort and stuff that I'd like to pick your brain about, but it doesn't have anything to do with moons. So
yeah, we'll maybe have to do a Night King Jon stream once I get my Night King Jon video out. You can see what you think of it.
That would be a good one. So. Yeah, because I haven't looked at my Night King Jon evidence in a couple of years too, so I'd like to go back and look at it again.
Yeah.
He does a whole Night's Queen King ritual with Val. That's one of my favorite scenes where he said, "Are you trying to steal my wolf?" But his wolf is named Ghost, and it's like, "Oh, you saw a beautiful, snowy, blue-eyed maiden north of the wall, and she's stealing your ghost, huh?"
Yep. And it is entirely possible that Val could be also involved in this shadow magic at the wall, like with Jon. I will talk about that in the video. I think Melisandre has a lot more hints to it, but Val is right there and very Night's Queen coded if she just revealed herself to have some magical power. Like,
very much so.
It wouldn't be surprising.
Very much so. I will say that, I'd like to talk to you about Night's Queen and if she's real and stuff, but that's not got anything to do with the moon either. So let's table that too. Let's see here. Let's talk about Asshai and the Wheel of Time. You familiar with Wheel of Time?
Not overly, but I've heard enough people talk about it. It's one of those. I haven't read it, but I've heard people talk about it.
There's only one little concept we need to talk about. It's not a big deal. So in Wheel of Time, the magic is gendered. This is written in the 90s. So I was thinking in terms of mostly two genders. Apologies. But yes, there's male and female magic. There's a male half and a female half. And what happens is, sometime in the past, the Dark Lord was a problem, and the male magicians wanted to go fight him, and the female magicians were like, no, your plan is dumb, and you should not confront him. And they had some magical trap that they did. So the male magicians went off and did it anyway, and they contained the Dark Lord. They did trap him, but they tainted the male half of magic. And so now, for the last however many thousand years, male magicians go crazy when they reach maturity and start channeling their magic. This is eventually cleansed late in the series so that the heroes don't go crazy and can do all this stuff. But I think George is doing something similar with ice and fire magic, where the fire moon is blown up. So what we think of so Asshai is called the Heart of Shadow. I think it used to be more like the heart of fire or summer, as opposed to the heart of winter. Meaning it was like, if you want to say the moons are magic, this would maybe be the point on the earth that's tied like a tether to the fire moon. You like this idea?
Yeah, I've heard an interesting take on this that I first saw this idea presented from an interesting nerd club theory. I don't know if you've ever watched them, but they like have people send in theories and they play like a game show to like try and guess the clues and pick apart the theory. And one
Mm.
of the theories was that a shy is like permanently in a long night state. Like a long night event happened over a shy, and rather than fix it, they magically worked it into their society and are now living with a semi long night permanently, which is why it's constantly dark there. So, like, I kind of, if that was be the case, I could imagine a situation where they had like called down a fiery moon based version of the long night and then just didn't try to solve the problem, just worked it into the way that their society works. Um, and I can't remember where what was the was there a
Well,
question
I'm
that I
talking about
was
the idea of like a shy originally having been before it was blighted and
oh
shadowed,
yes
having
that's right
been like a heart of summer or heart of fire
yeah
tied to the
so
untainted fire moon before this all got messed up.
yeah, it definitely could have been, right? Like if it was the place where they were, storing their souls in the moon and maybe they were worshiping it in a harmonic way, right? And then whoever did the blood betrayal, the birth of the dragons, whatever you want to say, did the horrible corrupting magic, it caused a long night. And then Azor Ahai, maybe his killing of Nisa Nisa was like the thing that like brought them into their current state where they're able to live with whatever effects of a long night happen. But like, yeah, I could definitely see them having been like not maybe like a hippie children of the forest society before the corruption of the moon, but at the very least like a more normal society that their leaders or powerful people within them wanted to take power, and it turned the whole society into what we see today.
Well, think about a hinge of the world. Okay, a hinge is a point on which the door swings. Right, the door is
Yeah,
a big thing. The hinge is a little point, but it's the focal point. Okay, so
yeah,
what I'm saying or proposing as a maybe, I don't know if I believe this, like you said, but it could be that the heart of winter is the physical tether or the magical tether to the ice moon, and the heart of
yeah,
summer, which is on the equator, makes sense that it would be on the
yeah,
equator, which is the warm part of the world, has is the tether to the fire moon. And so the condition in a
yeah,
shy is mirroring what's going on with the fire moon, where it is black stone, it is shadowed, a former home of dragons, and a current source of shadowed magic. And so when we talk about Relorism, I was looking at Melisandre. I was like, hold on a second here. Is R'hllor the god of flame or the god of shadow? Because you're using shadow magic more than fire
yeah,
magic. You're talking about, oh, well, shadows are cast by light. Well, shadows are all cast by things obstructing light, in my opinion, but it's
yeah,
maybe just semantics. But it's just like her, she even says R'hllor is the god of flame and shadow. So I'm saying
yeah.
that like fire magic is like the male half in Wheel of Time. It is tainted
Yes.
with shadow. The ice magic is too because of that piece of fire moon that's lodged in
It's
it. It's just different. It's not destroyed, but it's like
so
altered.
it's I think a way you can look at this is the fire moon is tainted with shadow magic. Potentially the other one is tainted with blood magic, maybe because like the weirwood has the moon matched bark and blood colored leaves. The black bark trees in the shade of in the House of the Undying, they have moon like dark black bark, which would match the darkened moon if there is one, and then the leaves match the shadows. So like maybe George is implying that like that type of magic that they're doing there is more mana based and life spirit based than like the physical older weirwood like cutting someone open blood magic of Westeros. Like it
So
could be something like that.
I would say that the one moon is poisoning the other. Okay. So the moon that got really messed up is leaking over to the other one. And that's why that street of sisters that's as straight as an arrow that runs between the two hills is interesting. That's literally
Yeah.
the arrow shooting from one to the other. So
Yeah.
that's what I think.
Yeah, that does track. Like it's definitely very very vague like trying to piece together what exactly you think was the corrupting event, right? Like there's enough different things that make sense where it's tough to piece it together. But like maybe that is something that we'll find out more in future books, I guess. Like, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know. It's
I've
tough to, you get to a point where it's like it's tough to, it's tough to decipher, I guess, which of these legends has more validity and connects back.
you
I
end up
don't know. I have
having to
to think
use
about it.
common sense to pick what you think is
Right.
literal and not. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Which is fine. But essentially, yeah, I think that like I feel good about the idea of, well, yeah, it's all parallel. So my theory about the Weirwood net is that the human green seers like Bloodraven and Bran shouldn't be in there. That was they're following and they're sitting in the seat of Azor High, who invaded the Weirwood net, pushed out the original green spirits that became the others. Okay. So the solution is to get the green seer hive mind out of the trees so the others can go back in. Now that green seer presence is a fiery presence coded for Bloodraven and Azor High and Bran the Builder, who possesses the fire of the gods and has red hair, etc., etc. So
Yeah.
they need to get that out. That's sort of like unhaunting the Ice Moon.
Yeah. Well, and if Bran does sort of reject like the full link into the Weirwoods and rejects immortality and like kills the Weirwood system and births a new one, I feel like that would it'd be a very similar magical solution to what you're saying about like sending the spirits back and letting them rest. Basically, is kind of the vibe I get.
Yeah,
Same,
so
I
that,
think, with the
yeah.
House of the Undying. Like the spirits that wanted immortality 10,000 years ago, maybe now just want to rest.
That's what I'd want to do if I was an 8,000-year-old spirit. I'd be hella tired. It's a lot of
Yeah,
revenge to be stewing on.
right. Staring at a cave wall all day, pretending to be a raven, even though all the people who you cared about getting revenge on or checking out are like dead 8,000 years ago. It'd get old. So yeah.
So yeah, I do tend to think they're all moon swords. I think that makes sense. I like the idea. So I like the oily stone Valerian steel idea. I should make a video about that sometime maybe. But look forward to all the videos that you've got coming to continue to explain this stuff.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to, gosh, I've got a lot of stuff I'm going to get to. I've got others video, then I'm going to get to some Dothraki Origins Disaster Hunter stuff. But I really would like to come on your channel and talk about some of these other things that you've thrown out.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, dude, maybe over the winter I think I should have a little bit more time over like January and February than I've had these last couple months. So I'll maybe start live streaming a little bit more over the winter, and then I'll have you on if I do. So, yeah, that'd be fun.
so. Let's think about if the moon is up there and hidden. Where would be the symbolic parallel for that? Where's the hidden fire Is it like Dany? It's like away from Westeros. Like
That you're saying like the little bit of
I'm looking for a
ice
parallel.
in
I'm
the
saying
fire,
if
the
there's a
yin
big
yang.
piece of the fire moon
Oh,
that's up there but invisible, there will be
yeah.
parallels on Earth.
Okay.
So where's the
Well, I
hidden
mean,
fire moon pattern?
you did already. I mean, it could be literally what you're talking about with the like the mostly visible ice, but the little bit of fire, right? Like ghosts being ice magic with the little red fiery eye. Like it could be that whole yin yang thing. That pattern could be hinting at it too, where it's like mostly you see the icy moon, but a little bit of the time you see this fiery moon in the sky, and that's the current state of the situation. Whereas maybe it should represent both sides of the yin yang if it was balanced. Maybe that's why it's not there, is because half the yin yang is gone right
So-
now because of the corruption.
So
I don't know.
Terry
Maybe like
Incognita's talking about Sansa. Correct. Sansa is a fire moon person who goes in disguise. Exactly. She
That could
goes and
work, yeah.
hides inside the ice moon. So I'm looking for
Okay,
one
yeah.
that is floating out in space somehow. Like I said, that could be Dany, because from the perspective of Westeros, she's, God knows where,
Yeah.
very far away and going to come back.
Well, there is also like if The other thing about this is Melisandre, who I think is probably immortal because she's tied to a glass candle, which is a theory we don't necessarily need to go into. But Gregor might be the same. I don't know, but like both of them have this black blood that would be color matched to the Shadow Moon magic. Dragons have black blood, which would color match them to the Shadow Moon magic. Maybe these dark figures flying around that are shadow creatures in the sky with dark black blood is that possibly the metaphor? Like the dark fire moon is out there, so you've got these black-blooded, fiery, flying creatures everywhere.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, even the black-blooded Night's Watchmen, they're all on the wall, which is like standing on the ice moon.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that too.
I pretty consistently seem to find the dead fire moon things lodged in the ice. They do get planted in the ground also. Those are the meteors that hit the Earth. But so that's basically what I've found with fire moon meteors. They hit the Earth, they hit the ice moon. You're right, though. The black dragon flying in the sky is kind of like what we're looking for. Kinda.
And Balerion, the Black Dread, is fully black, not just his blood. I think his fire's even black, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Drogon as well is black. Is his fire black or is it?
Yeah, black shot through with red. Yeah, same thing.
Okay. That's what I thought. So yeah, I'd bet the dragons are the symbolism of that.
Oh, the Black Fire House itself. It's sort of disappeared and lost and hidden and then coming back. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I'm glad you mentioned Gregor. This is a good thing I wanted to get in here. Maybe we can close with this. So he's showing us the whole path, kind of like Sansa is. So there is a mountain in the Vale called the Giant's Lance. It is a dark stone mountain covered in snow. So think about the Giant's Lance as the piece of the fire moon embedded in the ice moon. Now look at the tourney with Gregor and Hugh of the Vale. Okay, Hugh of the Vale represents the Vale. His name, Hugh, also means color, and he's dressed in the colors of the Vale. So he symbolizes the Vale as a whole. And Gregor, the mountain that rides, lodges his spear point. It breaks off the lance point, breaks off in Hugh's throat. So we've left a piece of Moon Mountain in the Vale. And that's literally what the mountain looks like. I'm not saying the mountain is actually a moon meteor. I'm saying it symbolizes the ice moon having a black stone inside of it. Just like Hugh of the Vale has a piece of Gregor's Giant's Lance inside of it. So let's follow. Go ahead.
I was going to say that gets even stronger if Gregor is currently animated by the magic of that dark moon, which I kind of think is the most likely thing he's animated by.
That's interesting. I was just chalking it up to nebulous Frankenstein magic. I don't know that George has
I think he does, and here's why.
Can you just pin it for a second?
Yeah.
Okay. Just 2 seconds. I promise I'll be really quick.
Well, yeah. No.
So the finish is the Gregor's fight. So when he fights Oberyn, he dresses in white, and they paint over his 3 dogs with the white sigil of the faith, which is a big star. But during the fight, it gets scraped off, and you see the dogs underneath of it. So this is more an ice moon with the hellhounds inside of it.
Wolves. Yeah.
And then he actually joins the Kingsguard, but he's dead. So he's a piece of fire moon that's dead, wrapped in the Kingsguard's snow.
Yeah, he's animated by the fire moon in the order of the ice moon. Yeah.
So you're saying that Qyburn, to unpin your pin.
Yeah, so I think there's not that many ways that you can really explain that are well set up for why Gregor could be alive. But if you look at the draft where George suggests that glass candles, you can bind yourself to the flame, and so long as the flame lasts, you'll never die. But the flame needs to be renewed from time to time with blood. And in Melisandre's opening chapter, you constantly have like little candle imagery. And initially in George's drafts, there were more glass candles everywhere. So in the original version, it seems like Melisandre, the candlelight you see reflecting in her red eyes as the last line as Crescent dies, was supposed to be the light of the glass candle that had just lit once again for the first time.
That's really cool.
So if that is what was going on, and even if it's not, the fact that candlelight flickering in her red eyes is the last thing we see of Melisandre, and the one we know she's immortal, the only fire magic immortality that's been hinted at is a glass candle bond. I think she's tied to a glass candle. So, where's the only other place that we're likely to find glass candles, basically, besides the Citadel? Well, the Targaryens probably had some down in the Red Keep somewhere, and Qyburn's been messing around there looking for dark magic shenanigans for however long Cersei's employed him. So I think there's a decent chance he found one of these things. He's just like, well, this guy's about to die. This old book says I can bind him to this freaking thing and he'll be immortal. This is a perfect test. Let's bind him up. And he needs to constantly be given new sacrifices because he needs to bleed them and do whatever to them to feed the flame with blood. But that's why the mountain has black blood. That's why Melisandre has black blood. The dragons have black blood because they're probably animated by the fiery moon as well. But I think that Gregor is tied to a big glass candle down in the Red Keep. And do you want to hear where I think that's going?
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead.
So get this. Let's imagine a Clegane Bowl happens, right? The mountain is fighting the Hound. And let's say the Hound is good enough to still beat him, but you can't beat him because no matter how many times you stab him, he's not going to die because he's immortal and bound to this glass candle. Well, Arya has an in-depth knowledge of the tunnels of the Red Keep and the ability to warg into cats. And if she was able to warg into a cat while Gregor is fighting Sandor and tip over the glass candle, put it out somehow.
That's where I thought you were going. It's literally the cat like tipping.
Knocks it off of Qyburn's desk while he's away
fragile.
And messes up all of his work. And the cat messes up all of Qyburn's work. The mountain, after being stabbed by the Hound 50 times, won't die. And right before he finally kills Sandor, he just collapses. And I don't know how George is going to show that in his POV structure. That's the hole in this theory, is Arya wargs a cat to kill the mountain during Clegane Bowl, the battle of the Hound and the mountain. It's set up well, but I don't know how he executes it. That's my hurdle.
That's some creative, Michael.
Thank you. I was proud of that one. I have a video about it, but it was poorly executed and titled because I did it quickly like a year ago. And I'm like, I'll come back to that one once I have a clearer picture, which I probably could come back to it now, but...
Well, we can see if Arya's watching the duel, she could handle it all in her POV because when somebody wargs an animal, we see it from their POV.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. She could warg the cat as she's watching from the crowd, and then she tips over the candle, and as soon as she's done, she wargs out and sees Gregor collapsed.
Even without Clegane Bowl, that's a good idea, though. Just
right. It just feels like her helping the Hound. Like her helping the Hound makes it even better, in my opinion.
Yes.
But yeah,
she's helping the Hound just by putting Gregor out of his misery, frankly. But
that's true too. Yeah.
That's cool. She has the cat warg and that's pretty cool, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and Qyburn has him alive somehow, and it's related to something down in the Red Keep, and nothing else makes sense but a glass candle to me for the mountain. So yeah,
a glass candle, or over. It could just be one of those things where that's off the page.
Yeah, the mystery. Yes, that's the other option for sure.
But if there is I've never had a concrete theory other than it's George doing his Frankenstein thing and it's necromancy and. It seems like blood can be a conduit of magic. Maybe it doesn't need to be channeled through ice or fire. It's just straight up blood magic.
Right, that too. It can definitely be used that way.
Yeah. But that's a cool theory. I like it. It has some nice little synergy as far as Arya going back to the Red Keep and using her tunnel knowledge and all that. It should pay off somehow.
Right, it's gotta, right? And she went back and watched Clegane Bowl for no reason. Because they didn't establish glass candles in the show. But they took her to Clegane Bowl anyway because she's supposed to go watch Clegane Bowl. That's I think that's part of it.
I would have been so mad if I had forgotten to bring this up, Michael. And moving on from Clegane Bowl, we're going to talk about the Teats and Pennytree.
Okay.
Remember when I just said King's Landing is like the sun and the two moons with the hills and the three hills or whatever? And you
Okay.
pointed out that
Yeah.
King's Landing was also like a weirwood tree. By the way, before they built the Red Keep, it was a timber keep. And there's a little wooden keeps and buildings sprouted like mushrooms on the hill, too.
Okay.
Is another one.
I bet those hills could be tree towns, or at least one of the three hills could have been a tree town like Bloodraven's Hill. But
I do think King's Landing was an important spot in the past, potentially. Yeah, I wanted to. I almost thought about doing a symbolism of King's Landing stream at some point. There's so much of it there. But moving along to the teats, Pennytree, as in Arlen of Pennytree. This is Dunk's Arlen of Pennytree. That's the town where he comes from. It is in the Riverlands. It is in between two mountains called the Teats, and these are the ones that the Blackwoods and Brackens fight over. And one of them calls them Missy's Teats, and one of them calls them Barbara's Teats or whatever. Okay,
yeah.
so the hills and the Teats are the moons. Let's just roll with me.
Okay.
Those are the moons, and in between them is the world tree. It's the penny tree. And the penny tree is covered with pennies. Which are stars, of course, in Westeros. Some of the copper coins are stars anyway. And then that would also make it a conductor, is the main thing. If you covered it with copper, it is now a conductor. So you think about lightning striking the tree. There's some other stuff. But yeah, we've got this tree between the hills. And this is mirrored with Ygritte's death. And Ygritte, her name, Ygritte, calls out to Yggdrasil directly. She's a Nissa figure. And when Jon finds her beneath the wall, she has an arrow in her chest. And she's dying and gaining an icy mask and becoming a Night's Queen symbol, essentially. So we've got a moon character turning from one moon to the other with this symbol of the arrow between the teats. Apologies, again, rest in peace, Ygritte. And then the other part is Sansa. When she goes to the Vale, she dyes her hair chestnut. A chestnut would be where a tree grows from between the teats. So it's more, and Sansa's doing the same thing, going from fiery Nissa to icy Moon Queen. And so we've got this symbolism again. So it's just George showing us the world tree and the moons and the setup of it. And so when Nissa dies, that is a killing of the world tree and disruption of the cosmic order. That's what's so poetic and symbolic about Ygritte's death, is it's like Mother Earth being shot, the trees being shot, and the moons are transforming, and
That is super interesting. Like, I hadn't thought of Pennytree in that way, but it is definitely like the two moons around the tree. And what I think, like, just thinking out loud,
that are being fought over by two sides.
Right, and also the nailing up the pennies to the tree, like, kind of sounds like nailing green seers up to the tree over the ages and corrupting it. Like, eventually, could you say that this tree has been corrupted over the ages by all of the pennies that have been nailed to it? Maybe. Like, I don't know if... Like, does he say anything about it, like, having negative effects?
Well, the copper pennies would turn green also.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
there's a few things
I'm
there.
not sure.
The conductors for electricity.
Honestly, wait. No,
stars.
they turn green. They definitely represent the green seers. I'm sold on the theory that I just came up with like 30 seconds ago. Nailing pennies to the tree is symbolic of humanity nailing green seers to the world tree, which they shouldn't be doing. And the two moons are orbiting around the tree with all the pennies or the green pennies or green seers nailed to it. That's what that means. Yeah.
And it would poison the tree. Pennies have faces too. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. I think Pennytree is a perfect example of the tree, the two moons, and the green seers.
The dwarf is a short adult, just like the children are short but old.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There you go. Yeah.
We solved it. That's why George is a master, man. Like,
because he can't put one single mystery that you can solve with less than an hour and a half of discussion, because otherwise you sound crazy if you don't explain all of the clues. And eventually people are like, oh, yeah, this guy's got so many clues. All right, he must be onto something. Like, that's the only way you get to a bottom of a George mystery is, like, death by 1,000 clues.
So I'm trying to think if there's any other matching ones to that. But yeah, that's a pretty good one between Ygritte and Pennytree and Sansa's chestnut.
Oh, since we're talking about the moons, unrelated to things we've talked about before, but I talked to you about this off camera at one point in the past. You talk about like moon symbolism with the Iron Islands, and I brought up, if you look at the Iron Islands, one of them looks like a big crescent moon, and then the others look like the pieces of the moon flying off of it. So if the Hammer of the Waters was brought down on the neck, the Iron Islands are right there, like, it could symbolize the breaking of the moon, you know, literally physically symbolized in the drawing of the shape of the Iron Islands. Yeah. Throwing moon rocks towards the neck is
well, that's kind of what the Thundar
Island
broken moon looks like. You know, it's got like the one big piece and then several small pieces, I think, or something like that. So
okay,
have to go look at it. But
gotta get that in there in the moon stream, though. Can't leave that off the table.
So here's there's so much, like, okay, House Winch, and I'm just freewheeling here with some of the stuff that we didn't get to fit in. House Winch. So look at the sigil.
Yeah,
it's a purple sky, which, by the way, the long night sky would be purple and gray. It wouldn't be black. It'd be like dark purple and gray. And here we have the bloody moon. Let's make Elio some money here. We got lots of. There you go. All right. So we got the bloody moon and the name winch. So winch is something that pulls things down. So or pulls things in general. You know, tie a rope to it, winch it. So you think of the songs about pulling down the moon for you and stuff like that. But it's a bloody moon, so it's dying. Their seed is the iron holt. A holt is a wood.
Oh, all right.
Like the hell holt means hell wood.
Okay. So are those probably ironwood trees then?
Well, the ironwood trees are black, and they're black trees.
Okay. That's the other thing. I was curious. I've always wondered, like, what is George doing with ironwood trees? But them being black is probably just a lot of his symbolism.
And it's a tie out to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, where there was a black magic sword was jammed into the tree, and it turned the tree to an iron tree of some kind or something like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is similar to all the crap we're talking about also. I mean, Elden Ring, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, there's a lot of ways to sort of step outside of Ice and Fire and get that extra perspective that helps you crack the mysteries. So yeah, at Iron Holt, the place where the woods are black, we pulled the tree down. We pulled the moon down, you know. That even implies the trees were used to winch the moon down. And of course, Asha Greyjoy has a chapter where she sees the branches of the tree scratching at the face of the moon when she's in the north. So, similar deal. It happens at Raventree Hall and then also the Night Fort.
Yeah, and I also I was just gonna bring up, like, in the prologue to just because I was going through that again last night editing my video. It's like, it's so crazy how every little line is just some foreshadowing when the others show up for the first time. It's like every line is referencing the trees in some humanoid way, like their wooden fingers, or it's the trick of the moonlight, some white shadow. Like, if it's not every sentence, it's every other sentence. There's some little foreshadowy language that George is using, and it's great.
Another one. It's Fellwood. So here we've got Fellwood, and if you remember the chat, this is one of Harwood fell into a cold pond and got frostbite.
Oh, okay. I don't remember Harwood.
Yeah, well, I made a big deal out of this in one of my videos because the whole thing is just pure symbolism. So Harwood, a tree guy, fell.
Yep.
And then his sigil is trees and moonlight. And then, they turned into popsicles when they fell through the pond. So
that sounds exactly like the Green Seers falling to the dark temptation of casting shadows with the moonlight to kill everybody. Becoming others,
really and becoming frozen. Yeah, so
That's what I love is like when you every once in a while you get one of those theories where everywhere you turn there's just more evidence for it, and it's just like that's how I felt about this whole like shadow moon magic theory here. And like, just to be clear, I'll explain this for people because I explained this in my video and I don't think I laid it out clearly here yet, is like, if the shadow babies and the others are mirrored in this way, it's so genius by George, because what he's doing is he's got these two moons, but we assume there's only one moon because he barely hints at the second darkened moon until he needs to reveal it, but he does hint at it. And so he can show us all this shadow magic done with the dark moon and color matched to the dark moon. And it's the exact same type of magic that's being done with the icy moon for the others, but you never make the connection because you don't necessarily know for sure that the darkened moon's there. If you did know that, you might see the darkened shadow and be like, well, hey, it probably is a lot like the white shadow. But it, by removing the like firm knowledge of the dark moon in the first place, but then showing us all the magic done using that dark moon, he's able to foreshadow all the magic done using the moon we can see without us recognizing it at first. So that's how it's like, oh, how do the others have so little information about them? Was because all the ways he's foreshadowing the others and the magic behind them, he's hidden it away, he's puzzled it out into some other area where it's disconnected, but you get the information that you need in a different form that you have to then make the connection, basically. And so once you see the two moons in the sky, the connection gets real clear. And yeah, then you can, as I said, piece together the puzzle that he built.
House Royce of the... There it is. Jesus Christ, dude. You see how easy it is to navigate this webpage. I love how you pointed that out in your video, that like George uses, he doesn't tell you about the others directly, but he gives you the Kingsguard, who model the others and tell you stuff about them. They were created to protect a king and queen, right? In some way. On and on. Exactly. So yeah, this is, again, another way in which I appreciate your approach, because it is the same one.
And that was another one where you had left an open-ended question, I think, in a video I had watched, where you're like, you laid out so clearly all the comparisons between the others and the Kingsguard, and I'm like, oh, this is great, and it makes complete sense if what the others are doing is what I think they're doing. They're guarding these bodies that are the center of this whole magical system. The Kingsguard are guarding the king, who's the center of the whole magical system. David's got it. Like, David's right. They are mirrored. That's why. Like, yeah.
So what do you make of this one? House Royce of the Gates of the Moon. Gates of the Moon, this is a place that is the same as the Black Gate or the Moon Door, the Bloody Gate, Gates of the Moon. It's all the same idea. It's the Weirwood Mouth. It's the death.
Yeah.
All these Weirwood doors are death doors. So yeah, what's here?
So what this sigil implies to me currently with the way I view the moons is that, like, maybe the Bloody or the Gate of the Moon is magically warded somehow, because like you've got the runes around a gate with the moon behind it, and like all of these other magical structures are warded with moon magic that shadows cannot pass. So I kind of get the vibe that he's hinting like the gates of the moon are probably
it's also a black gate
in that way.
It's a black gate.
It's interesting. Like
it would be. It's password protected at the very least.
Right, yeah, it's got the runes right there. It's got the moon right there. It's got plenty of things to draw magical power from. So yeah, I would imagine that gate is definitely, and it's black. Yeah, it's black and white, so both moons, the purple, the runes. Yeah, I'd bet it's hinting at possible magical barrier or like
And when you get to the night at the Bloody Gate, there's that ritual thing where you have to say the words, who goes to the night of the, who goes there, and they have to say who they are. So it's the same thing. Yeah, it's very similar to Sam giving the Night's Watch oaths to get through the Black Gate. So I think you're right. Yeah. These are all warded and protected with runes. That's cool. So there you go. I think that about will do it. There's more moon stuff somewhere. I wanted to read that scene where Sweet Robin throws his porridge and hits the moons on the Aaron banner. But
okay, yeah. There's too many. There's literally too much evidence.
We didn't talk about Moonboy.
Yeah, there's too much evidence for all of our theories. It's just you can't cover it all in one 3-hour live stream.
And yes, Terra Incognita, lest we skip the obvious, Moongate, Bloody Gate, these are feminine symbols. Yeah. So that's because the weirwood tree is kind of like a womb. People are impregnating it and it's giving birth to stuff.
Yeah.
So that kind of tracks. And Nissa and Knight's Queen, they are so closely associated with the weirwood trees, they might be weirwood trees. Like, it's hard to tell the difference almost. Like, I think Knight's Queen exists inside the weirwood net only. And that Knight's King, in order to birth shadow children with him, had to put his spirit in the net. That's where they're having spirit sex. And then the others are kind of like popping out. But
yeah, I tend to think she was tapping into it, but that, I mean, on some level, if you're tapping into a hive mind of a magical tree. Yeah. If you're tapped into the hive mind of a magical tree, are you or are you the tree? At some point it becomes blurry. So yeah.
It does get real blurry in there, in those caves. It's real dark. So cool. Yeah. I love, so I just want to remind, if you're not familiar with what he was saying about the glass candles and George's drafts that have more glass candle info, Michael, you have a video about that on your channel. What's it called?
I think it's just like what we can learn from George R. R. Martin's old drafts or something along those lines.
Cool. So yeah, if you're looking for that, it's on his channel. Just check it out. It's pretty recent, a few months back.
Was GRRM's old drafts of A Song of Ice and Fire. 1 hour of interesting things found, published in March. So yeah.
Cool.
There you go. And published today, a video talking about the theory that I've been talking about off and on in this stream, if you want to check that out.
Boom. There you go, guys. Cool. Well, I'm going to go work on my White Walker video after I take a nap and hang out with my birds for a little bit. But thanks for coming on. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas, David. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And yes, Merry Christmas. I wore the antlers for you guys. I do it all for you. Appreciate y'all. Let me just real quick see if I have gotten every super chat or if I have not thanked anyone. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Summertime. Black Dragon. Tantalite. All the brands. Yeah, make sure you check out Michael's Brand the Builder video, Tantalite. You'll enjoy that. Michael James. So yeah, thanks everybody. And I will have that video out this week as a Christmas present for y'all. And I'll see you next Sunday with... next Sunday is going to be the David Lightbringer Winds of Winter Predictions Theory Iceberg. So this is where I'm going to put all of my predictions down in one place so they're on record, so that if and when the stand book ever comes out, I can point to it all and say, this is what I got wrong. So.
There you go, yeah. Preferably you point at the things you got right.
Well, maybe there'll be a couple of those. We'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed. All right, guys, thanks a lot. And we're going to go ahead and get out of here. And make sure, like I said, you subscribe to our channels. And the link to Michael's channel is in the description of the video. Cheers, guys.